Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third annual APA SCD Symposium. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you today for a 4-hour program with 12 or 13 speakers from a diverse array of professional backgrounds to speak to you on the intersection of health, equity, and climate change. We're very excited to present this to you today. We're very happy to welcome the almost 400 registrants that we have for this event. This will be recorded today for those who may want to catch it later. But first, an introduction. I'm Carly Ebenbach. I am the chair of the Sustainable Communities Division, and very pleased to present this to you with other members of my executive committee. Just to tell you a little bit about our division, these are the statements that motivate us as a division. These are our vision and mission statements. This is what we're about. These ideas were cultivated through a careful strategic planning process. And we are a division with a roughly 11-year or longer history. And our work continues to be relevant in the realm of climate change response and addressing social equity as an element of sustainability and resilience. These two items are the pillars of our strategic plan. Just to give you a sense of what we're about as well, these on the left are our various committees that are doing work on behalf of the division, and on the right are some of our accomplishments of which we are very proud. At the top is this symposium, our third annual symposium. And you can see a little bit more there about things that we work on. And it's a wide array of programs and activities. I just want to point out that in addition to this strategic planning process, we have new volunteers and new initiatives under the umbrella of equity, diversity, and inclusion, including a new scholar program where we're welcoming in young professionals and students to work with us. We also have taken leadership on the Division Council's initiative last year, the Planner Perspectives on Climate Survey, which is still in process. We are entering the 11th year of our Excellence in Sustainability Awards program. We have a Climate Champions program, including 24 champions around the country, and various other policy and leadership efforts that we take as a division. I want to just draw your attention to right now, we have open the submissions for the 11th Annual Awards in Excellence in Sustainability. Please visit that web link if you have interest, you have a project that might be worthy of recognition with an award. We would love to hear from you. Also, if you are a Sustainable Communities Division member, we invite you to join us on the 21st of February for our annual business meeting. A registration link will be coming out soon for that. And we would love to have you to hear about what we've been doing as a division and to provide us with direction and ideas in an informal setting. This is a huge list of volunteers. But first, I want to say thank you very much to our 1,400 members. We could not do what we do without your financial support and your involvement. And then here on the screen are a team of about 30 individuals who give their time and energy to the division in different ways, as you can see. But I want to particularly highlight your hosts for today, Shannon Roberts, Donnie Goris-Kolb, Anna Rosenblum, and David Abraham, who worked very hard together to put on this program of panels and discussion, which is going to be very enlightening today. And it was a big lift, and they've really done a very nice job. So I want to thank them for their hard work, especially. I just want to mention, we are looking for 2 co-chairs of our communications committee, and if you happen to fit the bill or you know somebody who would, please do get in touch with me. My email address is there at the bottom. We have very robust communications, and we need somebody to just plug in and keep it going. Next, I could not go forward without thanking all of our sponsors. These are the sponsors that supported us in 2023, and we're now opening the call for sponsors in 2024. So if you have interest in supporting some excellent and cutting edge work in the realm of sustainability and resilience, I invite you to reach out at the web address at the top. We have very affordable options for sponsorship, including a $300 level and $500 level, depending on the size of your organization. It's a very great value for your sponsorship dollar. And last but not least, I'm going to pass this baton over to Donnie Goris-Cole, who will take you through the plan for the next 4 hours and tell you more about what you're going to hear. I guess it's over to you, Donnie. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Carla. So good morning, all, and welcome to the American Planning Association Sustainable Communities Division 3rd Annual Climate Symposium. I'm Donnie Goris-Cole, a Senior Climate Planner with VHB out of the Boston area. I'm pleased to have been part of this event for the last 3 years. It's a labor of love with this year's registrations, I believe, marking the highest count yet of the 3 years, so that's great. Again, thank you for joining us. I was joined in the planning of this event by my partnerships committee co-chairs, Shannon Roberts from Jacobs and Anna Rosenblum from Evolve EA, as well as David Abraham, our division's equity and inclusion chair, who you will hear from in just a moment. Thank you to my colleagues for the help, as well as others at the Sustainable Communities Division that has supported the symposium's logistics and marketing. It's no small feat. It takes a village to put something like this together. So thank you to all. And also a big thank you goes out to all of our panelists today. They are volunteering their time today to present to you their knowledge aligned with our learning objectives for this event, obtained through their experience and their research. They were selected to join us today based on how well their work intersects with urban and regional planning and how what opportunities those intersections provide to really enhance our work as planners to better serve the communities in which we operate. We really do have a packed agenda today, this afternoon, multi-hour worth of activities. You are welcome to join us just for the full event, or stay for just a selection of our panels. For those of you that are AICP credentialed, 3 of our sessions have been submitted for credential maintenance. So they are pending, but please add them to your CM logs once they are available. A total of 3 hours have been submitted. So getting into our agenda for today, like I said, we have quite a lot to go through, but between immediately following my introduction, we're going to hear from David Abraham, the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and Planning in the Black Community Division. We're going to get an update on that. Session 1 is going to be a keynote address by Melissa Jones, talking about health, equity, and climate change and the intersection between the 3 of them. Session 2 is going to be moderated by my colleague Anna Rosenblum, focusing on integrating equity and public health community planning. We could have a brief break of 10 minutes between 3 and 3:10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then that's going to follow by a session that I'm moderating, integrating climate and public health community planning. And then we'll wrap up with symposium reflections and some closing. We're going to have a bit of a fireside chat that Shannon Roberts is going to be moderating from panelists who are going to be continuing their journey with us today, just reflecting on what we've all heard today and how planners like ourselves can take the information that has been provided and really apply it in our everyday planning duties. So with that said, I'm going to hand it off to David. David, if you're with us, can you unmute?
Yes, I'm meeting now. Thank you. And I have a few slides I'd like to share as well to guide this talk and kick us off. So give me a second to get that queued up. Okay. Can you see the slide presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And let me switch to presentation mode. Let me know if you can still see. How about now? Hello?
It's not in presentation mode yet.
Okay. What are you seeing?
Your thumbnail's on the left and the slides on the right.
Oh,
I think
okay.
if you go to a slideshow, start from current slide.
How about this one? Can you see it now?
No, but I think you should just move on.
Okay, so tell me what you're looking at, please.
We see your PowerPoint slide in non-presentation mode with the
Right.
thumbnails on the
same.
side.
The same, basically. Okay.
But in the interest of time, David, I
Mhm.
would just suggest you present.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Abraham, and I'd like to share with you our committee's work on this wonderful symposium that we're hosting, and also to kind of lay the groundwork for what you should expect with regards to these amazing topics of integrating. It says here, I think I do have it queued up correctly. I think it says here my screen sharing is paused. So if you guys can release that, I think it's correct now. I've got all my screens showing the presentation. Hello? I don't know who's controlling this screen sharing, but I have it released now, so you can show.
David, we're still seeing the presentation in the thumbnail format. So if you could just scroll through the slides through your scroll bar, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. All right. So I'd like to briefly lay this out in terms of three different really areas that we can talk about with regards to integrating equity into the topics of sustainability, public health, and climate change. And the first one is obviously, why should planners care, right, about or be concerned about climate change? The second one is, what are the planning interconnections between sustainability, public health, and climate change? Again, we're going to have this discussion throughout the rest of the symposium. We're just laying the groundwork at this point for these topics in our field. And then the very last one is, how should planners then highlight the importance of equity in these domains? The aim of this symposium is to explore, again, the challenges and the opportunities for this integration. Last year was a historic year, again, for disasters in our country. And we've had the highest number of...
Excuse me, David, if you're on slide 3, I think you need to actually click on slide 3 because we're not seeing your slides advance.
Okay. Which slide are you on?
We're still on the number 1.
David, how about we do this? You can stop screen share and then restart by selecting the right screen that you want to share. Would you like to try that?
Okay, I just stopped. Stop share, yes.
So I believe you need to stop sharing screen on Zoom. I have a feeling that you clicked share on the PowerPoint window at the top right. There we go. That's much better. So let's try sharing screen again.
Okay.
So let's click on the green icon at the bottom of Zoom window.
Okay.
It's still loading on our end. Okay.
Mhm.
And now we see slide number 3.
Right. Okay. So the 3 questions I can pick up from slide number 3.
We see slide number 3. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Apologies, folks. Last year was a record year for billion-dollar disasters in our country again, and we've had 28 this last year. We have an average of apparently 8.5 disasters, but we are at 28 as of last year. We've had winter storms, wildfires, droughts, flooding events, tornado outbreaks, cyclones, weather. And as planners, we should assume that with increasingly more disasters, we will have the need for our skills and tools to get out there. And some communities are going to want to be a lot more resilient. Others will need to rebuild. And how should they rebuild? Or how should we be building for resilience and less vulnerability? And so this is one of our this idea of more disasters should be something that planners should be focused on. The next concern is last year we had a major drought. We had a major heat wave, 247 deaths, $14.5 billion approximately in damage. Drought conditions for planners mean a lot of things with regards to maybe the plantings that we are going to select to add to living spaces. Obviously, the rainfall numbers is going to reduce the water amounts. And if you look at that last bullet, down in New Orleans, we had an issue with salt water because of the Mississippi levels being reduced. Salt water started coming up the Mississippi. And so the drinking water amounts are in danger in that state. And that's something that we will definitely be paying attention to as well. Going forward, what about our future generations? In fact, what about us? This wonderful chart that was taken from the IPCC looks at, three different types of persons: those born in 2020, those born, which hopefully none of you guys on this call are, those born around 1980, those born back in 1950. If you were born around the 80s, you are going to be 70 years old in 2050. At that time, according to IPCC projections, you're going to be in the very high, or you're going to be actually in the intermediate type of height for heat and warming as expected. And so this is not something that only future generations should be concerned about. It's something that we should all be concerned about. And again, what heat does is it changes the way that people interact with their outdoor living spaces and also living spaces in general. And as a result, again, climate is not something that we can ignore. What have we been doing as a community? We are called the Sustainable Communities Division. But back in 2010, APA allowed a group to start what was then on a 6-month experiment, what was then called the Sustainable Community Planning Interest Group. And, I have to say that we are now a fully functional division, as is currently led by our esteemed leader, Carla. Carla, thank you very much. So from 2010, APA has been involved nationally in the sustainability field. My own work kicked off that following year. I joined that division the previous year from a previous role in consulting, but the next year I was fully fledged at a university doing research in sustainable communities, and that kicked off in 2011. The following year, I'm sorry, let me go back one step. On this slide, you'll see a selection of 2 different things. One is Also back in 2010, David Gottschalk and Wayne Feiden and David Rouse kicked off an effort for the APA nationally to define what it means to have sustainable places or sustainable cities or towns in our country. And I was invited by the State Department to go down to Rio in Brazil to present on what were some of the research options that were happening in our country. So I got to go down to Rio to present on what was happening in Houston and what research we were doing on campus for sustainable development. David Gottschalk, may he rest in peace, he ended up, along with David Rouse, publishing in 2015 this PAS report on sustaining places and best practices for comprehensive plans. Coming out of that Rio conference down in Brazil, there was this sense of, okay, we've got these Millennium Development Goals, we're not going to meet these goals, we've got sustainability, and we've got some issues. One of them is we're not doing a very good job on defining measurable goals in general. And let's think about that for planners. You know, we have a plan, but we don't, you know, this is the idea of implementation and measuring implementation. And so how about if we call for measurable goals? And so out of that call, 3 years later, we were able to develop this now national sense of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are 17 thematic topics to help folks focus on their area of expertise and what that would mean for sustainability. There's still the sense of all these goals are connected in some way or could be connected in some way. But, you know, if you want to ask a basic question, well, what's happening? What can we look to for sustainability principles or public health principles and climate change principles for planning? You can look at these 3 SDGs, SDG 3, which is good health and well-being, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and SDG 13 on climate action. And that was put out in 2015. These goals are very national in scope, and they're meant for an international community. I found that they don't meet many of them, not all of them, but many of them do not meet the US experience very well, only because, again, we don't have a lot of the problems that you might find in sub-Saharan Africa or in some places that don't have good sewage or infrastructure, right? We have other issues. However, New York City decided to do a voluntary local review for the Sustainable Development Goals. So they basically took this international kind of framework and they translated it into, well, how can we think globally but act locally in New York? And so New York became the first city to put out a sustainability report, so to say, back in 2018. Given the challenge of translating the national frameworks to local efforts, a colleague of mine and I, Seema Iyer, we put out a volume in 2021 to highlight actions that were happening across the city, across cities in this country, but also to highlight an attempt at translating the national goals to local type of goals. And so you find that in the last chapter of this text. The text is called Promoting the Sustainable Development Goals in North America, and it's available in Amazon for those who are interested. And moving right along, I presented to you what we have in sustainability. Many sustainability foundational experts will say, well, you know, the truth is that equity, public health, and climate change are integrated into sustainability. But where is the proof in the pudding, right? What are we talking about here? We're talking about topics and challenges such as air quality, water and sanitation, smoke-free environments, safe and healthy mobility, food systems, vector-borne diseases, like how do we live when we have vector-borne diseases like COVID? How should we manage how should our cities function in that scenario? And also emergency preparedness and responses. What I did was to take a look at the planning advisory service reports that APA has produced ever since we started producing these reports. And I only found 3 that kind of have a reference to equity in their titles. I'm sure many of these reports have references to equity type topics within the context of their report, since we can't do planning without a look at the people that we're planning for. But with regards to an explicit title, I only found 3. PAS 593, Planning for Diverse Communities, that was put out in 2019 by Ivis Garcia, who is now at Texas A&M, I believe. PAS 549, Fair and Healthy Land Use, Environmental Justice and Planning, that was produced back in 2007. And then Equal Opportunity Selected Statements from Planning Publications, that was published in 1967. So as a research expert in sustainable development, I can say that in our field, integrating equity and integrating public health and integrating climate change is a challenge for planners. We're still working that out, but we definitely are on the right path. And symposias like this one we're putting on is meant to discuss the pros and cons and, again, opportunities for that. My role here within the division is to lead an equity component. What should that mean for sustainability within planning? And so just recently, my colleague and I, my co-chair and I, Christina Viala, we developed a set of goals that we would like to use guiding our efforts moving forward. This is preliminary. It's meant to help us again to guide, but I wanted you to get a taste of the kind of things that we might be doing throughout this year. And so if any of you are interested in joining us, supporting us, or any of you see any resources or you know any opportunities that you think we could use, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to connect with you. And I'll quickly run through these. I won't go through every single goal. You can read them yourself, but it's in 4 different sections: people, education, action, and partnerships. On the partnership side, we hope to partner with groups such as the Planning and the Black Communities Division within APA. We are also looking out to the universities to help us, again, to be able to connect our resources with their students and how their students are being trained. We hope to also develop something simply like a newsletter, a listserv, where folks who are interested in equity and sustainability and planning can join to share information, best practices, opportunities, etc. Again, I won't take up more of your time because we have an exciting list of panelists queued up and ready to go. But yes, if you all want to contact us after to find out more information or to join us, please let us know. Donnie, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, thank you, David. I'm very pleased to now present Melissa Jones, the Executive Director of the Bay Area Regional Health and Equities Initiative, or BARI. She will set the stage for the symposium and will underscore the importance for planners to consider health impacts when planning for equity and climate change. So Melissa Jones, welcome. If you could share your screen, perfect.
Welcome everybody, or hello everybody, good morning. I am just moving into presentation mode here. Great, and it is a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you, David, for the launching remarks. Very much all of the work that I do is about supporting people who are pushing the edge of what we do next on planning, community development, health, and climate change. And so it's a pleasure to get an opportunity to talk to you a bit about that today, and in this technology space where we can all be together from all across the country. In a way that is very quite carbon neutral. And so it's wonderful to talk to you today in that context. So my presentation is called Resilient Systems Towards a Climate, Health, and Equity Approach in All Policies. And my goal today is to talk about the world we can create when health and climate change specialists join forces. And to talk about financial tools, processes, and mindsets that are available to us now that are implementing piecemeal in many communities across the country that can create a climate and health future. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my personal journey just to ground you in how I come to public administration, community development, and planning. And so I am the executive director of the Coalition of the San Francisco Bay Area's governmental public health departments. I have been for 7 years, so that means those 3 years of COVID response and in many years before that. I'm actually a community developer, though, by training and by decades of experience working in local city governments. And I have done a lot of training in adaptive leadership for racial equity across many different sectors in government. And I often start with the same tongue-in-cheek joke, which is, what is the worst subject to study in school? And if people have access to the chat, they can put in some guesses on what those worst things to study are. Let me see if I can see folks see that. And I often say it's history. And I say that tongue in cheek. I'm a political science major in my undergrad training. And I say that because often history gets taught to us as if where we have found ourselves was inevitable. But in fact, history is made through a whole series of decisions, some in government, some personal, some collectively in community, that add up to where we find ourselves today. And so to me, that is the incredible power of the public administrator and community planner, this ability to shape the future that we see next. And so that is where I spend much of my time. Barhai's work is to transform public health practice for the purpose of eliminating health disparities and really using a broad spectrum of approaches to create health equity. We run a national action lab that launched over the last year and a half that serves as a safe space for equity innovators across public health, community planning, community development, and other sectors to have safe space to test new ideas, learn new skills, and build the leadership supports they need to succeed during the course of their everyday practice. So this is really for practitioners who are in the moment doing work that they're hoping will drive equity, a more equitable and climate just future. I don't need to tell you this, and David just remarked on it. Climate change is now, and the effects are so deeply unequal. I'm in California, so we think a lot about high heat days, wildfires, and floods. And I know many of you think about other related climate disasters. The challenge of this particular moment is a new one for us. It includes these growing and more frequent disasters, but it also includes what we call co-occurring disasters. So the idea that our wildfire season co-occurred with COVID-19, that power shutoffs coincide with flooding, those kinds of things that start to have impacts in a whole range of ways. And those co-occurring disasters are magnifying community displacement and trauma, and they're sapping government's ability to respond effectively and can really decimate the resources, capacity, cause burnout in the first responders that we see helping in these emergencies. And first responders are doing all kinds of things on the public health side, not always clear to the planning side. Everything from when there are these major power outages, making sure dialysis centers can still run, or giving them notice about when they might have a challenge. Calling and doing contact tracing that you saw with COVID, relocating people after a fire, including relocating not only homeowners and people with leases and ways to know that they can come back, but people who were precariously housed or homeless, who now are in even more dire straits. These things take a lot of work. And in the end, the question really is, how do we build resilience and create less vulnerability, like David said? And that kind of response, that kind of strategy really requires some multi-agency, cross-sector approaches to resilience planning and climate response. It has us thinking about our buildings, about emergency preparedness, about open space and parks, about how we move from one place to the next in our transportation and transit systems, and healthcare. And together, there are numbers of small collectives all across our country working on advancing our practice in those areas. We don't need to think it all up new. There's a lot out there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of pathways that could be useful to you in your current practice and work that might not be a far leap from where you are and could really reinforce the progress we all want to make towards climate and health collective solutions. And so I want to talk about a couple. First, I want to talk about the world that we could create. Here is the Bar-High framework. It's the framework of our organization on how to create health equity. Some of you have seen it, I'm sure. It's a very famous framework. It appears in many, many public health textbooks across the country. It's the foundational document used in much public health department accreditation across the country, our national accreditation system for public health systems. And it's also the foundational document for the American Medical Association's health equity strategy. And it holds that the things we know about health, the differences in life expectancy that we see by race and class, the differences in infant mortality, that these indicators we often think of, or people often think of health as a doctor's office activity. But in fact, the living conditions we find ourselves in, the institutional inequities we experience that have made those living conditions so different and made our vulnerability so different to climate change, and then the social inequities that created those institutional inequities are really the heart of the intervention point to get us to population level solutions on both climate and on health. This framework really echoes the World Health Organization's understanding of what it will take us to get to health equity. And using this model of intervention at the community, living conditions, and institutional inequity scale has had tremendous impact across the world, lifting incredible numbers out of poverty, moving incredible numbers through efforts around sanitation, water, some of the things that David was talking about prior, but also issues around economy and housing, issues that we experienced ourselves across the pandemic. When housing solutions were in place, as they were across much of the country, including eviction moratoriums, we saw a dramatic increase and improvement in health outcomes for people across the board. And we can have that world, this sort of low carbon, climate resilient world. This slide is adapted from the California Department of Public Health and Change Lab Solutions, and really talks about what that kind of intersecting world could look like, what our climate and health co-benefits could be, the kinds of systems we can be creating as health professionals and planning professionals across many of our communities in the country. And in many places, increasingly, we have planning tools that integrate health and planning together through health elements and other strategies that really could start to bring us to this place. And there are some existing models now of cross-sector collaboration that include revenue streams that are flexible enough to do this, processes that set precedent for different sectors to work together, and some room for innovation. I want to talk through just two with you today. The first is a model from San Francisco, led by a Bar-High member who's been a very active part of our built environment work group for a number of years, doing incredible work thinking about the intersection of climate and health. Some of you might know him, Matt Wolf. And San Francisco, like several communities across the country, was the recipient of the Center for Disease Control BRACE grant. These grants really worked on building resilience against climate effects with an eye towards health. They used a model of first forecasting through data, climate impacts, and assessing vulnerabilities. And the best programs did that with an incredibly strong equity lens. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. They then projected disease burden, assessed the existing public health interventions, and developed plans that could be implemented cross-sectorally to make change, evaluating the impact along the way and all the ways that are important for us to know that we've got not a theory, but something that's working in practice. Of course, this for me is the heart of public administration and why I love it, why I moved into that as the heart of my career, which is we care deeply about the policy, but we are stewards of how the intent hits the ground. And that really is the goal of these evaluation programs. San Francisco already knew what many communities, I'm sure some of yours know as well, that high heat days have particularly high impacts. And when they really dug into the data, they found what we found all over the country is that it's not just high heat days, but high heat days, a number in a row, particularly if you're living in housing that doesn't cool down at night, creates a level of emergency response in hospitals, deaths, and other kinds of health impacts particularly for vulnerable populations that are exceptionally difficult. And so they took a look at what their high heat day, wildfires, and extreme smoke experiences had been, and what they were likely to be in the future. And that kind of assessment that blended health and climate became very important, but it didn't stop there. It went deep into the conversation about what are the different vulnerabilities that people have. Who's more exposed? Who has more sensitivity during that exposure? People with pre-existing health conditions or other issues. And then what is the adaptive capacity to adjust as these risks come forward, right? And they started to understand in very concrete ways the different ways that different communities in San Francisco were experiencing high heat and other climate change impacts. That resulted in a report, you can find it here, May 2023, that launches the Heat and Air Quality Resilience Project. It has several pathways, including a focus on extreme heat and air quality issues, on the built environment, on buildings, on a whole range of different kinds of planning interventions that can make a huge difference for both health and others. I want to name, and that Brace grant really helped do all of that. There are a number of other funding streams that are likewise can do that. I also want to name one more strategy that's in play in many communities across the country, because I think it's such an accessible way to find the partners who care about the intersection of housing and climate in your community, and that's weatherization and energy efficiency services. You might find them in your city governments, you might find them in your community development corporations or other partners who work in the community side on helping to improve building quality or building energy efficiency. This happens to be a model of one from Tulare County, a smaller county in California, that has done a lot of this work. These exist, though, in many counties all across the country, including in counties that tend to have less nonprofit or philanthropic infrastructure. Often, still, your utility companies will have programs that do this. And so they improve the ceiling, SEALING, not of buildings. They improve the air, which can in turn improve air quality issues, include in other strategies, and then do that in a way that really has an impact both on health and on climate. And these are really important opportunities to find places where you can make a pragmatic impact right now on a family's health or a community's health, as well as start to make the changes that matter for environment and climate. So if you're interested in those programs, or you already have your resources together in your work, and your goal is actually just to think about how do you want to piece them together differently, there's a report I'd like to offer that's available on our website at no cost called Farther Together, which is best practices for engaging communities in the dialogue about how you can plan for health and climate and resiliency in the region. It's a very timely time to do this. We know communities and hear from communities all across the country who are doing it, because the aftermath of COVID-19 has raised the sensitivity of different communities to various disasters. You can enter it from a COVID-19 angle. You can enter it from a climate disaster angle. There are many ways, depending on the local energy in your community. But this gives you a step-by-step plan on how to engage community partners in a way that's going to create long-term resilience to have the systems you need when an emergency strikes. And so I'm going to close with just one more comment. This one is a bit more visionary, and it's about something that has been emerging in many places, but I don't think we've yet seen it all as a system. And this is about the new equity specialists in government that are emerging all across the country that could be a very interesting way to look for possibilities in health and climate. In many places, and I know that there's a complication happening right now, and if we end up with a little time, I'd like to speak to it. We are seeing a whole of government shift around having staff who are committed and focused on equity efforts. Those positions are funded different ways in different places, but in general, we are seeing department level equity staff in, say, a health department or a planning department or a climate specialist that also has a health background or in climate equity background, sometimes named that way, sometimes not, for a variety of reasons. We're also seeing agency level senior staff, city and county executive level staff focused on this. These are hundreds of positions across the country in hundreds, excuse me, these are many positions across the country in hundreds of jurisdictions. And then we are also seeing that in regional governments. So our metropolitan planning organizations and others increasingly have numbers or bureaus of equity staff. And then also in some state agencies, this is where the variation is. And then across federal government in most public federal agencies right now, you also see these shifts. These equity positions, which started as one-off positions in one county or another or in a city, are now numerous and many and beginning to coordinate. One model for that, the Equity Officer for Emergency Response, is available on our website. And that model really is a model that we see across all kinds of different kinds of jurisdictions, all kinds of political persuasion and jurisdictions, because it really is about that core component of the equity response model. But it also talks about after the response, what are the resilience pieces that move into place for you to go from having equity in your emergency operations into having equity long-term and resilience long-term. And these emerging roles that are really emerging in incredible ways. I'm just showing you one example. California is one of the largest states in the country. It has a sort of reputation for being particularly liberal, but actually, if you look from the far north through down to the border, there's actually a huge variation in political energy. And throughout that variation, you still see this level of counties and agencies establishing equity leadership, just to give you some sense of what we're talking about in scale. I could do the same thing for a number of other states across the country. And these equity units and staffers are beginning to connect and learn in both national and regional networks. We host several. The Government Alliance for Race and Equity hosts more or additional. And the importance of those, I think, is that there is a place for networks like yours to be connecting in with who might be the local partners to advance your local equity efforts. And so I will just close with saying that there's a lot moving in the health and equity space, health and equity space. I think if you look far forward, it can feel overwhelming. But I think if you look locally, identify the partners who are working on similar things, like weatherization, like community planning, like emergency intervention planning, and start to find the other partners with your mindset. I think there's an incredible amount of work that can be done. And that over time, that is what builds up to the system changes we need for health and equity. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for sharing your thoughts with us and setting the table for the rest of this afternoon's program. Really interesting and inspiring presentation. And I know that I'm going to be looking up, especially that Farther Together report right after the symposium. So it's always great to see some resources for planners and things that we can start working on tomorrow. So thank you again. Really appreciate it. So next up, we have our first panel, which is titled Integrating Equity in Public Health Community Planning. My name is Anna Rosenblum. I'm one of the partnership's co-chairs along with Donnie and Shannon. And I'm also an associate and senior project manager with Evolve Environment Architecture, or Evolve EA for short. And I will be moderating our first panel. I'm very excited to have our panelists here today to discuss the intersection of health and equity and how it relates to the planning field. Our work as planners has the potential to significantly impact this area, but we're most effective when we take a cross-sector approach, similar to what Melissa was just speaking to us about. So when we're working together with nonprofits, public health professionals, government, and other practitioners. So that's why I'm really excited to hear from a variety of perspectives during our panel today. So during the panel, you're going to hear from 4 individuals. first we have Derek Neal, who is the Chief Public Health Officer with Cambridge Public Health. You'll then hear from Robin Bussey, the Just Health Director with the Partnership for Southern Equity. We then have Lindy Wardlaw, who's the Chicago Recovery Plan Director with the City of Chicago. And then last but not least, we have Becky Bash, who's a Senior Planner for the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. So the panel will address how to integrate equity into public health community planning to ensure fair and just distribution of resources, opportunities, and outcomes within diverse populations. And our panelists are going to speak about how their work addresses these challenges, where there are opportunities to integrate equity and health, and what gaps still exist in this field. So first off, we've got Derek Neal, who is a health administrator with more than 30 years of public health experience. As Chief Public Health Officer, Derek oversees the Cambridge City Public Health Department, which is a nationally accredited department with the goal of promoting the health of Cambridge residents through services, information, policies, and regulations. So with that, Derek, I will pass the virtual microphone and the screen sharing over to you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, let me share my, okay, my share button isn't here. Okay, there we go. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to give you as much information as quickly as possible because that's how I like it. Again, I'm with the Cambridge Public Health Department, and just as a geographical reference for you planners, we're outside of Boston. We're a tech hub, a relatively wealthy city. We have Harvard and MIT here, as well as Google. But we do have what we call health equity zones, and which means we do have marginalized or poor communities in Cambridge as well. But we're fortunate to have a lot of resources. Much like the rest of the country, we're facing that opioid epidemic. But let me get into this talk, and I think it's important that I read this first statement to you. From a public health perspective, as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fifth Assessment Report makes clear, we must undertake substantial, immediate, and sustained action to mitigate climate change if we are to avoid catastrophic changes and action to date based on what has been politically feasible has been woefully inadequate. I think that's incredibly important because oftentimes in public health, we're funded by the government, and most politicians want to see change right away. And public health is really focused on breaking generational curses. Again, one of the core things that we're focusing on, because public health is extremely nosy, and anything that's harmful to anyone in our community, whether they're wealthy or whether they're our most marginalized citizens, that's the business of public health, because we really want to address breaking generational curses, because that's how you improve health over time. So again, the things that we're really into and excited about in public health is really being able to promote sustainable diets and food systems, making sure that we support several community gardens, but we have to make sure that people are growing things that are native to their soils, because if they try to grow things that are better grown down south, then that creates an unhealthy environment for all of our citizens. So what we try to do is partner with the local farmers markets and getting healthy produce out to those individuals who don't have the resources to eat healthy. It costs a lot of money to have a healthy diet, and typically those processed foods aren't supportive of the outcomes that we want to see from a health standpoint. Of course, creating more walkable, bikeable, and transit-supported cities and communities. Cambridge is 5 minutes away from Boston from a walking perspective, but the population here is only 150,000 individuals when it becomes in the evening time. but in the during the course of the day, because of the commuters that come in, it balloons to about 210,000. So we're dealing with those eco issues as well, with a lot of individuals being able to drive in. We're quickly becoming a bikeable city. We have a lot of policies around that as well. Offering virtual rights-based access to sexual and reproductive health services. Cleaning up the air is incredibly important. And when we look at water and soil. Before I go to the next slide, I do want to mention some things. I want to mention social determinants of health. We hear a lot about that. That simply means where you live, work, and play are indicators and dictates not only your quality of life, but how long you're going to live. So those things are incredibly important. We need to look at equity in all policies because a lot of policies that are written simply minimize or don't consider to the extent that we need them to consider those communities of color. So that's important. And we are on the precipice of declaring racism as a public health emergency, but because it infects and impacts the decision making of those individuals from a planning and public health perspective. So racism keeps us from our promise. And, you know, we have implicit biases that I deal with within my organization as a man of color. So we have to have those honest conversations internally ahead of making that declaration of racism as a public health emergency, because it keeps us from doing the work that we need to do. But we need to be able to have those honest and open conversations within our organization because those things are truly impactful. But you have to have that at the policy level in order to truly impact change. So those things are incredibly important. And again, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, breaking generational curses. And as we look at climate effects on health, climate change together with other natural human-made health stressors influences human health and disease in numerous ways. Some existing health threats will intensify and new health threats will emerge. I spent my first 18 years of my public health life running various health departments in Texas, both in Houston, in Abilene, Texas, Victoria, Texas, and Williamson County, which abuts Austin, Texas. And what I can tell you is that from a planning perspective, what we're seeing is a lot of the hospital systems being shuttered in the rural communities and individuals on a population flow to the larger metropolitan areas. So that leaves those more rural areas without adequate health care. But then you have a lot of individuals going to those areas like Houston where the air quality isn't so good. So we have to begin to look at those things in terms of being able to support healthy environments such as biking. One of the things that during my time with the city of Houston, we moved to telework way before the pandemic because it was too many cars on the streets. And if you know anything about Houston, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There was too many cars on the street. So our employer actually paid for us to catch the park and ride, which means you drove your car to a substation in your neighborhood and you got on one of those big Greyhound looking buses and it took the HOV lane and it dropped you downtown. So they offered that supplement to us to prevent individuals from driving into downtown. And then that wasn't having the impact that they wanted. So we went to, some people worked a 4-10 schedule. Some people went to a 3-day schedule where they worked 2 days at home. So it's things like that that public health looks at and supports just to minimize the problems that we're having from an environmental standpoint. Again, I'll just go over a couple of these. The health effects of these disruptions include increased respiratory and cardiovascular disease. We had a disproportionate number of individuals in the Houston and Austin area that were just taking in a poor quality of air because of the exhaust from vehicles. I am guilty. I'm a motorcyclist and I drive pickup trucks. That's kind of part of my Texas roots. And I haven't been able to wing myself off of those things, but I know that I have to, demonstrate the leadership that I want to see within my community. I'm working on it. But those are some of the things, are selfless acts that we have to be able to make in order to do our jobs. And again, the changes in the prevalence and geographical distribution of food and waterborne illnesses and other infectious diseases. What we're seeing now in Cambridge is, you hear about the Texas busing individuals to New York and Chicago, where we're getting an influx of migrants from Haiti as well. So we have to look at those cultural aspects. Um, just the relationship management, justice, equity, diversity and inclusion, and climate adaptation planning. I'm not going to regurgitate what's already here, but what I would employ you to do from a planning perspective is to conduct needs assessment, but be inclusive of those populations who have the very least in our community. And living in Texas, we have poor white folk down there too, as well as in Massachusetts. So it's not always about color, it's those individuals who don't have the resources. But it's important to include them in those needs assessment processes so we can actually know what their day-to-day experiences are. And again, justice, equity, and diversity and inclusion. I would employ you to take a deep dive into the resource that the Center for Disease Control has for us in terms of things that we can do from a planning perspective to just make better decisions, not only for the current population, but for generations to come. Again, we want to be able to break those generational curses. And I went as fast as I could and tried to convey as much information as I could, but I'll stop there because a lot of this information is here. They're going to share this information with you. And I just wanted to, I just appreciate the opportunity for public health to come in and give you our perspective, but we have the same objectives in mind. We just have complementary ways of getting there. So thank you so much, Anna.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Thanks so much for starting us off with the public health perspective. That was really helpful. And next up, we are joined by Robin Bussey. Robin is a seasoned professional with a strong commitment to racial and health equity and community well-being. She currently serves as the Just Health Director at the Partnership for Southern Equity, where she manages and advances their health equity portfolio, providing strategic vision and overseeing day-to-day operations. So Robin, I'll hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from a very cold Atlanta, Georgia. So I pull up my slides.
All in the cold is here.
Oh, nah, but for us, it's super cold.
Oh, I thought I was on mute. I apologize.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. So thank you all for the opportunity to share with you all today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Just Health as well as the PSC ecosystem as well, and how we can be a partner in planning and how we are a partner in planning. So a little bit about Partnership for Southern Equity. We are an Atlanta-based nonprofit, and our mission is to advance policies and institutional actions that promote racial equity and shared prosperity for all in the growth of metropolitan Atlanta and the American South. And it's no accident that we focus on the American South, that we're based here in Atlanta, because we hope where the South goes in terms of racial equity and justice, so goes the rest of the country, as the South has for a long time been the epicenter of a lot of the inequities and injustices we see throughout the country and throughout the world. So the way that we do our work, the way that we are grounded in this work in terms of advancing racial equity is called the PSC way. So these are a few tenets of the way that we work. We always lead with race. We believe that if we can solve for race, we can solve for a multitude of issues, including wealth, including class, including gender and such. Catalyzing relationships. We know that relationships are very important to all of the work that we do. The actions that we take are important as well, and the outcomes are important, but relationships are important. We always say that change moves at the speed of trust. So if we're not able to commune with each other, to understand each other, to be an authentic relationship with each other, it's gonna be a longer time getting to where we want to be in terms of equity and justice. Growing an equity ecosystem, we fully realize that people do not live single issue lives. And so we understand that we have to take this ecosystem approach. There has to be intersectional work to really make sure that we're able to affect the change we want to see in our lives and our communities. We ground in communities of color and communities of low wealth. We understand again that race is almost always the foundation of a lot of the inequities that we see, but we also see how it manifests itself in other communities that are not communities of color, but communities of low wealth. A lot of the inequities that we see, particularly in those racialized communities, also manifest themselves in communities with low wealth and those that have been historically divested in. And also foundation in data and research. We have to start somewhere. We all have our opinions, but we also want to make sure that when we're communicating, we always lead with facts so that our message can be heard and received. This is a little bit about PSC's ecosystem. We work to disrupt systems and silos. And as I said before, none of us live single issue lives. So it's very important that our work takes the ecosystem approach. So our work is intersectional so that we can consider how to develop multi-solving and integrated solutions. And this is a part of our ecosystem. We have Just Energy, which focuses on energy equity and democracy. Just Growth, which focuses on equitable growth and development. Just Opportunity, that focuses on workforce and economic inclusion. Our organizing unit is really how we go out and communicate with our communities. Our Impact division analyzes how we do our work and how well we're doing our work. Yes for Equity is our youth power building arm. We actually have several youth staff who are integrated in all of our portfolios because we recognize in all of this work that power sharing is important and voice is important. So the voices of our young folks are just as important as the voice of some of us more seasoned folks. And our Justice 40 Accelerator is our way to make sure that we're doing our part to work with grassroots organizations to be able to be in a position to access the money that the Biden administration has put forth in order to enable and support climate justice and environmental justice work. And also my favorite is Just Health, which is the health equity portfolio, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So we are PSC's framework to advance health equity by connecting, listening, learning, and practicing via a broad and diverse health equity ecosystem in support of Georgia and the American South. And I want to stress that although we talk a lot about Georgia and the American South, a lot of our work in PSC, particularly in our other portfolios, goes beyond Georgia. It goes beyond the South. We're growing and moving more into national work, but we are always can continue to be grounded in Georgia and the American South. So these are our values as a portfolio, and this is what drives our work. We believe, first of all, that health and well-being is a human right, that racism, particularly structural racism, is a social determinant of health, if not a primary social determinant of health, that our resources must be shifted toward addressing more systemic issues versus programs. We can't, as we say, program our way into freedom. Programs are great, but to really see the change that we need to see, we have to really affect change at the systems level. Empathy and reflection are key drivers of our work. We have to see ourselves in the communities that we serve and see ourselves in the work that we do so that we can make that authentic connection and be able to really engage with folks. And then again, data and research must be owned by the people, because we know, again, with planners, and sometimes I'm a reformed academic researcher, we a lot of times go into communities, particularly when we have things we need to do, like our community health needs assessments. Every few years, we go to the same communities and we ask questions and we get their input over and over again. We take that and then they never see it again. And so we want to make sure that we're not extractive when we're working with community, that the data and the research that they supply also belong to them, that they're able to use it to do the work that they need to do as well. There we go. So this is our ecosystem within Just Health, within the Partnership for Southern Equity ecosystem. This is the way that we primarily do our work in these three avenues. We have our circle, which is a monthly convening of equity champions and advocates to come together and really troubleshoot together. At minimum, I always say you're going to come and meet someone maybe you've never met before, but we're there to troubleshoot, to be able to have a level table where practitioners, folks from social services, from the healthcare sector can come together and commune with other folks who are community members, folks that they may not have an opportunity to interact with very regularly, to make sure that we can all share our voice, troubleshoot, acknowledge problems, form partnerships, to be able to come together to collectively work to minimize health inequities in our various communities. Our Just Health Academy is where we work with communities, anyone I say who has any interest in health equity, who wants to learn more about health equity, what it is, how do you operationalize it, how does it look, and how is it showing up or not showing up in your community and your work. And this is how we go through a learning session and really make sure that folks get the grounding of various topics around health equity. First of all, language. We think language is very important. Words mean things. We talk about the difference, for example, between health inequities and health disparities. They're often used interchangeably, but there is a difference. So we focus on things like that. And we also make sure that folks are able to take what they learn and apply it into their communities. So we make sure that there's some type of community-based project at the end of all of our academies. And then our health equity, the urgency of now. That's our listening and learning session that we developed in 2020 when, COVID was raging. And for some folks, the inequities that people were experiencing, particularly people in communities of color and low wealth communities, was brand new to some folks. Whereas those of us who've been in this work for a long time, we've seen it, we knew what it looked like, we knew that how it was going to show up in that dire time. But it was also a time to extend that message to others, to get folks to understand how this work actually impacts how inequities impact the work that we do, and how we can make sure that this is not something we do right now in the throes of this terrible pandemic, but how can we make sure we continue to do this work and continue to bring partners into this work, so that, again, when people stop talking about health equity, when it stops becoming the buzzword, there's still those of us who are organized and advocating for health equity. So Just Health, a little bit about what we do, and my apologies, I did not follow the PowerPoint rules. I put way too many words on a slide, so you can read a lot of this for yourselves. We just want to give you an idea of a little bit about what we do. Again, we promote health and racial equity by listening and learning. So we're there to go into communities and authentically engage with communities, and also practitioners, to understand what the issues are, to be able to listen and get folks to listen to each other, communities and practitioners, to understand what their collective issues and differences are, and also to be able to have those uncomfortable conversations. So all of our work, all of equity, is grounded for us in racial equity. There can be no health equity if there's no social equity. And so we want to make sure that we start by having conversations about history, how we got here, why we're here. These are not new issues. For some they are, but for many of us, these are not new issues. And for communities, these are not new issues. So how do we start to address those things so that we can have a firm understanding, a collective understanding, and start to move toward collective advocacy? We do training and technical assistance. We work with health departments. We work with any and everyone, communities, social services organizations, anyone who is interested in racial and health equity, to learn about racial and health equity, what it is, how we can make sure that it is a part of their work, and also internally and externally. I think, as Derek mentioned, it's one thing to talk about health equity and to be able to do it and show it to your customers or those you serve, but it's also important that you have equity internally. How are your policies and operations making sure that the folks who are doing the work are also included and their voice is lifted up as well? There's a shift in perspective that has to happen for a lot of folks. Again, going back to that historical perspective, these issues are not new. We have to make sure we address and understand where they came from, so we can start to organize solutions to be able to address them and possibly keep them from happening again. We conduct research and data collection. Again, we make sure that what we work on is evidence-based. It is informed by evidence, and we translate that research to communities, to practitioners, whomever is in need of understanding what's going on out there as it relates to health and racial equity. And again, all of our work is really grounded in policy recommendations for systemic change. we think, again, programs are great, but to really make that systems change, we're going to have to lean in on changing policy. So more about our work. This is just a few, these are a few of the partners and some of the work that we do. The Two Georgias initiative is really what was the basis of Just Health in Partnership for Southern Equity. And if anyone knows anything about Georgia, there is Atlanta, the metro area, and then there's the rest of Georgia, the other 159 plus counties. So, you know, as you all have seen over the years, and particularly in our last election, there's very blue Georgia, and then there's the rest of red Georgia. So how can we, you know, recognize the issues that the red Georgia is having that are very different from what's happening in Atlanta and the metro area? Issues that we saw again around COVID, around broadband access to transportation. Many of these communities are experiencing deserts when it comes to care, when it comes to maternal care, even primary and emergency care. How can we make sure that those issues are lifted and that those communities feel supported in developing coalitions and being able to advocate for what it is they need to be able to live their lives in a healthy and equitable way? We work with the Department of Public Health very strongly. Each of our counties has a public health department. So as I mentioned, there are 159 counties in Georgia. There are almost as many different health departments. So we work with health departments at the state and also local levels to be able to understand what it is, what their role is in health equity, how they can engage with communities authentically and be able to have those conversations and be able to move equity within their communities. Our primary work around climate and health is what's called the CCHE initiative. It's a Kresge Foundation initiative where we are focused in Southwest Atlanta and communities that are almost always hit when there's any climate event. Whenever there's heavy rain, there's always flooding. There's lead in in the soil in that community. We recently had, you know, a wave of storms, and these communities were some of the ones that were hit the hardest. And these are also the communities that are not always in a position to be resilient. So we want to make sure we're growing and building resiliency in those communities. But what we do with this work is we try to bring together the conversation of climate and health equity. A lot of folks now are having that conversation and understand it's an integrated conversation. For a lot of communities, it remains two conversations. And for a lot of folks in these communities, you know, climate change is still, you know, polar ice caps, the melting of polar ice caps, and it's a really abstract concept. But what we try to do is get folks to understand how climate change affects them every day. How when we have all these heat events and we have these urban heat islands that, you know, grandma's house is really hot for a reason because her house is old. It doesn't always have the infrastructure for HVAC. We want to make sure we check on her and make sure that, you know, she has what she needs. So this is how climate change shows up in their communities and how it relates to health. And so once we have that understanding, we work with the community to apply that lens to their community, what's actually going on in their communities. So then they can identify priorities to be able to start to advocate and work on in their communities as it relates to climate change and health equity. And we're working to extend that work out of the metro Atlanta area into, again, to those rural communities that don't have the same infrastructure, who still need to have that understanding of the intersection of climate and health, and how, again, they can start to advocate for themselves where those are concerned. And our signature training is called Why Health Equity Matters. So it is where we, again, talk about what health equity is. We talk about the differences between words. We don't show the baseball field and the boxes. No offense to that graphic, but you know, we got to move beyond the box and the baseball field. So we do this, again, for a variety of audiences. We've done it for health departments. We also work with the health departments in the state of Virginia as well. We do it for communities. We do it, again, for anyone who wants to have that understanding of what health equity is. And then we also go further as to how to operationalize health equity. How does it actually show up in your work, in your community? So our work is very community driven and place-based. We always include community voice in our work. We honor their lived experience, and we believe that those most impacted by inequities, those who are closest to the problem, are those with the solution. So we always want to make sure that that voice is included. And we also work with practitioners and other providers to be able to have those conversations, to be able to authentically engage with community in a way that community becomes a partner in their work, and it's not an afterthought, or it's just not a box that you check. You went and you had a town hall and you offered some, in our case, Chick-fil-A to a community. You actually are being thought partners with the community in designing health equity solutions. And so we like to be able to be that bridge to help practitioners and communities work together. So where we go next, we continue doing our work. We continue to, build those relationships, engage authentically. We continue to be that bridge between practitioners and between communities, so that, again, they can authentically engage, they can work together, and they're also informed about what's going on in the equity landscape. So while we talk about health equity in my portfolio, we also want to make sure that folks are understanding what's going on in the equitable growth and development space, what's going on in the workforce space, and how we can get more youth involved. So we really always try to take an intersectional approach to this work. We work very closely with our energy portfolio to be able to do our work around climate change and environmental justice and health equity. And we also, again, lend our whole ecosystem to anyone who is looking to deepen in their equity work. So it's not just health, although I think, again, health is the best portfolio within the ecosystem. We can't do our work alone. We always have to have our fellow portfolios working with us. So we are all and strive to be a partner with you all in your planning work. And that is it. So thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be with you all today.
Thank you, Robin. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you sharing about the Just Health ecosystem, the systemic approach that PSE is taking to race and health equity. And it's also great to hear about PSE and Just Health being a resource for folks for training and technical assistance. Really appreciate you being here. So thank you. Next up, we are joined by Lindy Wardlaw. Lindy is the Chicago Recovery Plan Director for the City of Chicago. And in her role, Lindy oversees the Chicago Recovery Plan's climate and environmental projects in partnership with numerous city departments. These projects represent the single largest one-time climate investment in the city's history, so $188 million, and will help Chicago achieve critical climate mitigation and resilience goals while equitably distributing those benefits across the city. So with that, Lindy, I will pass it over to you. Oh, and I think you might be sharing the screen that also has the speaker notes. So, yep.
Just a second. I'm having trouble. Same troubles before. Like I can't move over to the presentation mode. Okay, let's try this again. Are you able to see the presentation mode? I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, we're still in the mode with the thumbnails on the side there.
Okay.
There we go. That looks good.
All right. So I am unable to see. Just let me know if it's advancing, and if it's not. Are you seeing the full slide or no?
We're seeing the full slide, and it's the title slide.
Okay. Well, I guess we're good to go. And just let me know if it's not advancing, and I will be glad to adjust. So hi, everybody. Super glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me for this important conversation. I'm Lindy Wardlaw. As stated, I work with the City of Chicago. I'm in the newly reestablished Department of Environment. I am one of several Chicago Recovery Plan directors, and I'll explain what that means in just a minute. But I did just want to give a little bit more about my background. I am an urban planner. I've been working in the field since graduating from grad school in 97, which feels like 1,000 years ago. And I've been doing energy sustainability and climate planning since 2004, which it was very new in the Midwest at the time. I know, of course, along the coast have been some states and communities that have been talking about climate for a long time. And so, but it's been really fun and rewarding and challenging to work at it kind of from some of the beginning stages here in Illinois and the Midwest. So here do you see the next slide?
We're still on the title slide.
Okay. I don't know what's happening. None of my things are advancing.
Do you have the share screen paused, or that might be something that's going on?
It doesn't say that it's paused. Let me reshare again. Apologies. Oh, great. I just added slides. Okay, give me a second.
Lindy, at your on your top bar at the second in display settings, if you click on that, I think you can switch to presentation mode.
Yeah, the problem is that that area is blocked where I can normally see it. Let me see.
Is there a Zoom window on that area?
No. Apologies. Maybe I should just continue on because
Yeah.
I don't want to lose. Yeah, I'm not sure why. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't have this problem when we did the run through. So
Yeah, no
I'm
problem.
not-
We could either do this or the
Yeah.
version with the thumbnails, either way.
I'll
Whatever
just do
works.
this.
Yeah.
If folks can see this, hopefully that's a little bit better.
Yes, that will work.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So can you see the next slide one more time?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about this, everybody. I promise you I'm not this inept usually, but we'll get going and I'll try to make up the time I know I've already been talking a good 4 minutes. So, the work that we do here in Chicago on climate, really is centered on a just and equitable climate future for Chicago. We know that there are historic inequities, with deep impacts across our communities, particularly in our Black and Brown communities. And as we strategically act to address our growing climate crisis, we really have to approach this while we're upholding the values of equity and justice that folks have been talking about here today. We have to reckon with the legacy of systemic issues that have led to these disparate conditions. And we have to remove the barriers for all Chicagoans in order to participate in and realize not just the environmental benefits of climate action, but to also experience the myriad co-benefits that are there, such as economic inclusion and savings, reduced pollution burden, equitable access to critical infrastructure, and community health and resiliency. Okay. Sorry, I added some extra slides as I was fumbling around with the presentation. So over the last couple of years, a small but mighty sustainability team grew from a really small team of 2 in the mayor's office. Last year, we transitioned into the Office of Climate and Environmental Equity. And as of January 1, under the leadership of Mayor Brandon Johnson, we were reinstated as the Department of Environment, which had been dismantled for over 10 years ago from a previous administration due to budgetary constraints. But we're happy to be back in action as the Department of Environment. During this time, though, it wasn't as if there was an action. There had been many things going on over the last couple of years. We've led or played a role in numerous efforts, and some of them are noted here in this timeline. When you get a chance to look at the slides later when they're posted, you can take a look at them, and I'll include links for each of these. But they include a city divestment ordinance to divest from those investments related to fossil fuels, an energy supply agreement that will power 100% of city buildings, 100% renewable energy by 2025. We are we do intend to reach that goal, and this includes the development of a renewable energy development that's underway right now that will power 70% of our building portfolio. It's one of the largest in Illinois. And then, we conducted a working group to develop a set of equitable, community-centered building decarbonization recommendations, energy codes, and all sorts of things. But today, I'm going to talk to you about just a few projects that are kind of centered on the intersection of climate, equity, and public health planning. And so one of them is Our Roots Chicago, and the other is the cumulative impacts assessment. So Our Roots Chicago is really looking at the tree canopy in Chicago. And much like other examples, we could look at any number of social indicators, and you kind of get that same story in Chicago. The same areas of the city have these deficits, and trees is just one of them. Our Roots is really meant to address the lagging tree canopy coverage in these areas of the city. We know that trees improve the air that we breathe. They provide shade for people and places during hot summer days, and a host of other quality of life benefits. And we know that tree coverage is not equal across the city, and I'll show you an example in a minute. In late 2021, Chicago used ARPA funds boosted by additional bond dollars to craft the Chicago Recovery Plan in order to aid neighborhoods most impacted by the COVID pandemic. The goal of Our Roots is over 5 years to plant 75,000 trees while specifically targeting certain communities. Funding also provided for the addition of 3 more foresters to help plant all these trees, upgrading planting and tree maintenance software, which had been pretty antiquated up until now, and implementing a community tree ambassador program. So the tree data, we started first with data. We could tell, just by looking, you can walk in a community and see if there's a lot of trees compared to the next neighborhood or not. But that wasn't enough. We really wanted to start mapping where our trees are and understand it. And using that data, we documented the tree canopy coverage and noted clearly that on the city's south and west sides, in areas most commonly associated with other evidence of historic disinvestment, there are far fewer trees. This data we then combine with all sorts of other health, environmental, and socioeconomic factors. And then we then targeted, in our first year, targeted 11 community areas that were facing the deepest disparity for tree canopy coverage. As a note, there are 77 geographic community areas in Chicago. Community areas is just one name. There are neighborhoods within each of those community areas too, but we do define the city in these geographic boundaries of 77 community areas. In 2022, year one of the planting of the project, we targeted planting at least 30% of tree plantings in 11 community areas. And we defined tree equity by utilizing a series of data points shown here on the right, combining tree data, again, with these various health and socioeconomic indicators. At the end of our first year, we planted 18,000 trees, and here's a picture of that ceremonial planting, and you see some city officials, including our former mayor, Lori Lightfoot. And then again, in 2023, we took stock and we looked at data and added some new data points and decided to expand from not just 11 community areas, but 22 community areas where we were going to target. So just really expanding it mostly on the south and west sides. And you'll see that in many cases, in the darkest areas, we did achieve goals of planting more. And I'll show you some of the percentages in just a minute. At the end of 2023, we planted our 23,000th tree for the year. So that was another exciting moment. But I think it's important to note that, here you see city officials, our new mayor, alderman, and our chief sustainability officer all here playing a part. But one of the key components of this is really the community. We simply can't do this alone. And if we did it alone, as we always do, we likely would just land where we were with the disparate tree canopy coverage. And so the key component really is the large group of engaged and committed community partners, whether they're organizations or individuals. Here is a quick snippet of, we have a 115-member community tree equity working group. Yes, they all come together. Yes, those meetings are online, and it can be a bit challenging, but it's great to have all the voices at the table. So it includes, I would have to get the exact count of organizations that are represented, as well as those neighborhood individuals. Upon engaging all of these folks, and this includes regional organizations as well, including an arboretum and some other regional organizations. We, at the onset, we developed a website with community-driven content where we share information, dispel myths about trees, and provide content for community organizations to use, whether that, topics for the website were put together in partnership and with the guidance of community members. Here is just a quick snapshot of some of the things that were put together. And this was in coordination with other city departments, including Chicago Department of Public Health, Department of Streets and Sanitation, who is one of the main departments that plants trees. Chicago Department of Transportation also plants trees. And so we released a series of communications assets here that can be used. They can either be used digitally, or we have physical forms that are always made available to any partner in this effort as well. There's a section of the website. This is really important. You'd be surprised the negative messaging, or maybe you won't be surprised, but there is some negative messaging about trees and, oh, you don't want a tree in your yard. It's gonna, it's going to ruin your property values and those sorts of things. And so we have lots of, information on here that community partners can use, or if people want to come to the website and learn for themselves, it's all available here. So where are we right now with the project? Again, it's a 5-year project. We started in 2022. And as we head into year 3, we're more than halfway towards our goal of 75,000 trees, and are more intentional than ever to continue achieving our targeted goals. You can see how little we were even planting before the surge in funding that we had. So if you look here on the left on the bottom chart, we planted only 4,000 trees in 2020, about double that in 2021, but we really kicked it off in 2022. And as you see, the very intentional planting that occurred in the community areas. And so we're really excited to start planting again in 2023, and we expect to see, our goal, we went from 30% in the targeted areas, the 11 targeted areas in 2022. In 2023, our goal was to plant 40% of all trees in the 22 community areas. We have not established what our goal will be for this year, but we anticipate continuing to increase the planting in our targeted community areas that need that coverage the most. So the next project I'm going to talk about is the cumulative impact assessment. As a requirement of the city's voluntary compliance agreement with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the city of Chicago agreed to conduct a cumulative impact assessment that was co-led by community groups and the city to identify neighborhoods that experienced the greatest cumulative burden, and to then inform decision-making around both policy and potential target investments the city should make. The overall assessment includes community input summaries, an environmental justice index and map, an environmental justice action plan and method to do that, and cumulative impact policy recommendations. Just to provide a little context, Chicago isn't really different from a lot of cities, especially big cities in the United States, and especially those that are, former industrial cities or with a lot of manufacturing in them. We have a strong network of environmental justice organizations and outspoken community members who've spoken out about these issues for decades. In fact, in 1994, when President Bill Clinton signed the Executive Order 12898, Federal Actions to Address Environmental Justice in Minority Populations and Low-Income Populations, he heralded Hazel Johnson of Chicago as the mother of environmental justice as he was signing that document. As part of the Chicago Recovery Plan, funding was put aside to conduct this assessment with and for the people who experience these environmental justice issues every single day in our neighborhoods. We established 4 working groups in this planning process to advise, conduct, and write the assessment and recommendations. And you'll see here on the right that within each of those working groups, there is not just a city department, but it is led by external community partnerships. This co-development model puts the community in the driver's seat. They are co-pilots and advisors in this process. Community engagement also included reaching out to community members and involving them during the entire planning process. Whether it was through engagement sessions, tabling at community events, surveys. We did a youth focus group and a business community focus group. People were engaged in the ways that they could participate, whether it was along the way throughout the whole development of it or one-shot engagement opportunities. The EJ, and then another outcome of the assessment is the Environmental Justice Index. The goal of the index is really to be able to use it to help inform city decision-making when it comes to development decisions in neighborhoods. It's not yet set in stone. It is a work in progress. We are clarifying exactly how it will be used, exactly which departments will use it. But this is the initial draft that really combines incidents of environmental exposures, environmental conditions, and comparing it against population characteristics. Who are the sensitive populations in the community? What are the socioeconomic factors to consider? And so the goal would be that anytime there is a development decision being made or a policy decision being made, the goal would be to apply this index to it and this thinking so that there is some analysis and awareness of the impacts of that development or policy moving forward. Another outcome of the assessment is the Environmental Justice Index map. And so this is really, and this too is a draft. This is our first draft, and we have engaged community members to tell us what they think about it. Does this reflect what they think about their own communities and other communities nearby? To really see, like, are we on the right track? Do we need to tweak this? But the main point is to designate certain census tracts as EJ neighborhoods by using a score that incorporates a variety of community health and other indicators. This map, again, it isn't final, and the data and methodology that inform the map are still being finalized based on the input and that we get from people. But the trend really does show, once again, a high concentration of environmental justice neighborhoods on the south and west sides of the city. And again, the south and west sides of the city are where predominantly the Black and Latino communities live. That's probably not a surprise to anybody. And then finally, the final recommendation of the assessment is to develop an environmental justice action plan. What does this mean? Really, it's that each department will develop and will kind of build their own muscle to really start thinking more critically about the decisions that they make, whether it's development or standing policies and how they directly and even indirectly impact communities. And so we'll be working closely with every department to really think about what is their environmental justice action plan. This is very similar to the city's effort to have racial equity plans for each department as well. We have an Office of Racial Equity and Justice that has been working with each department to think about the impacts that their decisions have in Chicago. And so it's kind of building along that same framework to have, to think critically, think broadly about environmental justice in that same vein. So when you're able to download a copy of the slides, you'll be able to see a link to, and it's here if you want to look before then, all of the cumulative impact assessment materials that there are to date and when there are any final updates. So I just wanted to conclude here by, again, I wanted to share 2 examples of all of this work in action. We have a number of other projects, and perhaps I can include some additional links for examples of this in action here at the City of Chicago. So again, thank you for allowing me to share on these projects, and look forward to the discussion after our next presenter.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Lindy. We appreciate you sharing a couple of the Chicago Recovery Plan projects. I know you had many that you were kind of working to choose from, and probably could have been an hour or a couple hour-long presentation, but great to see a couple of examples of the great impact that your work is having. So last but not least, we have Becky Bash. Becky is a senior planner with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in Western Massachusetts. Her focus is on the intersection of health and land use, and in that role, she works on a number of initiatives that center on health equity and improving opportunities for healthy lifestyles through changes to policies, systems, and the social and built environments. And so with that, Becky, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Just want to make sure you're seeing my slide screen.
Yes, it's showing up.
Okay, great. I will try to fly through this. I know we don't have much time for questions and answers, but just a little history of our region. We are in the Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts, which includes Hampden and Hampshire counties. Hampden County is a lot more populated than Hampshire County, includes the cities of Springfield and Chicopee, and also includes high rates of poverty, whereas Hampshire County has the 5 colleges. So there's a very different divide in between the 2 counties that we work with. Our population of Hampshire County also is primarily white, with only 6% identifying as Hispanic or Latino, and 6% Asian, 3% Black. Hampden County has 27% Hispanic or Latino, and the cities of Springfield and Holyoke each have over 50%, with the majority of those communities being of Puerto Rican descent. We also have an aging population, and a lot of my work focuses on healthy aging. This shows a chart of the demographic change in age of the population. And nationwide, we know that by 2035, at least the population of people over 65 is going to outnumber children under 18. And so we're already seeing that in our region. Almost every town on the top left has higher rates of younger people under 18, and the lower right shows that the percentage of the population over 65 is already taking over the majority of the population. So we've been doing health planning work at PVPC since about 2014, 2015, starting with the Healthy Community Design Toolkit. I got there in 2018, not having a background in public health, and so I had a lot to learn. but I was fortunate to participate in some programs that provided a lot of training and capacity building around equity and the built environment. So we worked on the Mass in Motion program, which I'll talk about a little bit later. The Hamden County Health Improvement Plan was published in 2017, and we had a 5-year grant to convene partners with that grant, and we have 4 working community teams that are implementing strategies in that plan. I've been working with age and dementia friendly communities since about 2020, helping communities become age and dementia friendly, and gradually integrating that work into, or actually all this work into the resilient comprehensive plans. Our Healthy Community Design Toolkit, it was developed in 2015, updated in 2017 to include a focus on healthy aging. It talks about leverage points for incorporating health into plans and regulations. So housing, transportation, open space and recreation plans, and also includes a regulatory review checklist. The Mass in Motion program was out of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health and was in response to growing rates of obesity, diabetes, and other food-related chronic disease. It's focused on access to healthy eating and active living, so access to food, places to be active, also centered around equity and identifying priority populations. And the goal is to make long-term change through policy, systems, and environment change. So the chart you see here is rates of obesity. We worked with the town of Palmer, which had almost 45% of children who are obese or overweight. So we did community food assessments and enrolled towns in the complete street programs, looked at park access and like the amount of park space per capita, did a mobile market study, and then finally integrated project findings into the Palmer Comprehensive Plan. This is a model that the Mass in Motion program uses out of Health Resources in Action, and it's another way to show social determinants of health, which are the trunk of the tree, really starting with the leaves, which are health outcomes, going down to behavior, so lack of exercise and diet cause obesity, diabetes, and then you ask, but why, as you go down. And so some people don't have access to places to healthy food or places to be active. And then underlying it all are systems of dominant culture and narratives, with racism, structural racism being the groundwater layer or underlying all of it. So really trying to delve into the root causes of health is where the Mass in Motion program was going, and much of our other work. They also emphasize including community members in all our work. So this is the continuum of community participation or community engagement. So really the goal is to involve, collaborate, and ultimately empower communities to make change and to be involved in the plans that we're developing. The Palmer Master Plan was funded through a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. And that program goes to communities to create MVP plans or municipal vulnerability preparedness plans. And then once they've developed that plan for climate emergencies, they have the opportunity to apply for implementation funds. So the town of Palmer applied for funds to develop a resilient master plan. It happened that at the time I was starting to think about closing out the Mass in Motion program. So we proposed integrating all the work we'd done in Palmer into the master plan. And so I worked with Donnie on this panel. So VHB was the lead consultant. We worked very collaboratively, met monthly, and I participated in several public forums just to get that health aspect into every chapter of the plan. So I think it was a great collaboration. We ended up getting a Best Community Plan in Massachusetts award. And this was all during the pandemic, I should mention. So in 2020, they had 8 public forums on Zoom, Facebook Live, local cable access TV. So did a really great job considering the constraints of the moment. This is another model that looks at aspects of age and dementia-friendly communities. So this was developed by the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative. And it looks at aspects of the built environment, so outdoor spaces and buildings, housing and transportation. Those are all generally included in comprehensive plans, but it also looks at the social environment, as well as access, equity and inclusion, social inclusion, participation, public safety, health and community services. So all of these things contribute to making a community that's supportive for an aging population and also for many marginalized communities. So the idea is if you focus on marginalized communities and older adults who aren't typically included in the processes, then it becomes a good community for everyone. With our Age and Dementia Friendly Pioneer Valley Initiative, we've worked with all these communities in Hampden and Hampshire counties to make them age and dementia friendly. And this is really a community engagement process, working with older adults throughout the process, engaging them with surveys, listening sessions, and having working groups in place to help implement the plan going forward. And as I said, we're integrating this work now into comprehensive plans whenever we can. This is just the process of age-friendly designation through AARP, and AARP is a great resource for different tools to develop these community assessments, as well as the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative has a number of resources available. So our resilient comprehensive plans focus on vulnerable populations. That's really where the link was for integrating planning around older adults, people living in poverty, and other marginalized populations. We use those plans as a community assessment for the Age and Dementia Friendly Communities designation, integrate goals and actions into all chapters of the plan, and develop an action plan that can be submitted to AARP. So we've added these chapters to two other plans that have MVP grants for comprehensive planning. And gradually I'm trying to get across that you know, the communities that are affected really need to be the ones that are engaged in the planning process and not as an afterthought. Too many plans, I think, have been developed with, you know, small focus groups around older adults, but when older adults are a third of the population, you need to go beyond that. So some key takeaways: use data to tell the story of changing demographics with aging populations. Consider demographics and health priorities and community engagement efforts, so engaging older adults and marginalized populations. Multi-year grants to allow development of relationships across sectors. That's really been key with the Hampden County Health Improvement Plan. We do work with a number of community-based organizations and healthcare providers, and have developed really strong working relationships with all those folks. Add value, so leverage existing planning processes to incorporate changes to the built and social environments that will support opportunities to be active social and have access to healthy food, and incorporate goals and actions into all chapters of the plan. And then transfer ownership to the community and create a thoughtful action plan or implementation plan, review with lead entities that are going to take those forward, and really try to support and encourage community-led efforts. So that was it in a nutshell. I hope there's a little time left for questions and answers. I will stop sharing.
That was great. Thank you, Becky, for sharing some of the work of PVPC. It was really great to see some of those examples. Also great to see some resources that planners can use as part of their own work. The Healthy Community Design Toolkit, you know, great mentioning AARP is another resource for planners. So thank you for sharing that with us. We are a little bit over time, so we're actually going to skip the discussion and question and answer for this panel. I do encourage our panelists to take a look at the question and answer from the audience, though. We have some great questions in there. Encourage you to kind of provide some written responses while we're in the break. But we're going to take a pause now for a 10-minute break and then return with our second panel. So thank you, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
All right, folks, welcome back. Again, Donnie Gores, Cole from VHB. We're excited to get started on panel number 2, integrating equity in public health community planning. Integrating equity into public planning, we feel, is a fundamental approach that seeks to ensure fair and just distribution of resources and opportunities and outcomes amongst diverse populations. Our panel today, comprised of 4 people, will... Oh, I'm sorry. We're going to be talking about integrating climate and public health and community planning. My apologies. We're going to be talking about the considerations that are brought into public health community planning. From a climate perspective, it's a crucial initiative that recognizes the intricate interplay between environmental factors and public well-being. Today, our panelists are going to help us learn how to integrate climate considerations into our work through how they integrated climate considerations into their work, and how they would like to see it expanded within the planning community and elsewhere in the future. So as I mentioned, we have 4 different panelists. We have Dr. Anne-Christine Duhaime, a pediatric neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. We have Dr. Patrice Williams, professor at Northeastern University. Matthew Tejeda, Senior Vice President of Environmental Health at Natural Resources Defense Council. And we also have Fleming Al-Amin with the FTA. And we'll go into further bios, but right now I want to introduce Anne-Christine, or Tina, as she would like to go by. Tina, could you pull up your slide deck so we can get started on your presentation? Thank you. And if you can just put in perfect.
How's that, Donnie? You can see it?
It looks perfect. Great. Thank you.
All right. Do you want me to get started, or are we ready? Or did you have more to say?
Nope. I just wanted to further introduce you. Dr. Duhaime is a senior pediatric neurosurgeon at the Massachusetts General Hospital and is a distinguished professor of neurosurgery at the Harvard Medical School. She has a long-standing interest in the relationship between the brain and behavior and in environmental issues. And that's evidenced by the fact that she is also a faculty associate of the Harvard University Center for the Environment. So very, very busy in this area. Her book on this work, Minding the Climate, published by the Harvard University Press, was awarded Sustainability Book of the Year in 2023. So most recently by the Project Syndicate. She now serves as Associate Director of the Massachusetts General Hospital Center for the Environment and Health, supervising the research pillar, and as an Associate Editor-in-Chief for the Journal of Climate Change and Health. So Dr. Duhaime is a perfect person to bring onto the panel today to discuss the intersection of public health and climate change.
Thanks, Donnie, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. So all of you have been taking notes about, practical things. You can put down your pens and pencils or your keyboards, because this is going to have nothing to do with planning directly, and you don't have to even think about it. It's really nothing more than to help a little bit with the frustration that those of us in the climate change world who are trying to implement change feel when other people don't seem to get it. And this talk is really about why don't they get it? There are reasons for why this is such a difficult topic for people, and why your priorities may not align with the priorities of the people you have to convince to make the kind of changes that you're all working so hard to make and that we heard about in panel 1. Oh, I knew this was going to happen, Donnie. It's not advancing. Oh. Let me try one more thing. Nope. This happened to the last speaker too. I don't know why. Okay, let me stop share. I'm going to bring it back up.
That seems to be the trick.
Yeah. I'm just going to advance it like this. Can everybody see? Oh, no, because I didn't share. Hold on. Of course, it always happens when you're short of time. Okay. Can people see that? All right, let's see if that will advance. I'll try to make it a little bigger. Okay, we'll give it a try. Okay, so full disclosure, I am not a climate expert. I have worked on climate change for about the last 10 years. but I am a layperson. This is what I do for a living, and apologies to anybody that's squeamish, but this is what pediatric neurosurgery is all about. Basically taking care of one child at a time, but I got concerned with what kind of future are we leaving them? And so this graph is something you've all seen, the carbon curve, carbon dioxide parts per million on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and that incredibly sharp increase that happened in the post-industrial age. And this has really gotten people in the health community, practitioner community worried. This was in 2021, a code red, meaning it is a real emergency for a healthy future that we need to decarbonize, we need to think about climate change, and we need to think about it equitably, as all of you have done. I like this slide, the information on this slide, because I didn't know this. And when I got into this world, I had to learn something about the numbers. And this comes as a surprise to people, even people in healthcare that are worried about climate change. They don't know these numbers. And when you think about it, why should they know them? They didn't learn this in school. But basically, this tally of the numbers helps to overcome some of the arguments that, there's been a lot of disinformation, as you all know. And people say, well, what about China? US isn't the problem. Why do we have to worry about this here? Anything I do as an individual doesn't matter. Oh, it's all about companies and industries. And I didn't know the answer to any of this, so I had to delve into it. And, you all know these facts because you work in this area, but CO2 lasts 1,000 years. The US has put more of it into the atmosphere than any other country. China now puts more per year, but of what's up there and causing the problem, most of it is ours. About half, you can argue this depending on what study, what research you look at, but on average, about half comes from things we do as individuals in our own households, and about half comes from companies, industries, institutions, things we can't control in our domestic life, but we may control them in roles that we take in other capacities, like your work as planners. And here's the thing, the US per capita is about 20 tons of CO2 per year that we emit. It may be closer to 18 because of changes away from coal in the past year or two, but the world average is about 5 tons per person per year. We are at the top of the curve here. And to keep within 1.5 degrees C, we have to get down to about 2 tons per person per year. And that means that the things that are shown in the bottom of this slide, which all of you work on reducing, this is where our problem is. So what can we do? Well, you all know the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These are the curves of the various shared socioeconomic pathways over time. What will happen to our carbon dioxide in the atmosphere if we do different things? You've all seen this kind of curve. And, depending on what we do, we can either be at the top where it's really bad, or we've already lost the opportunity to be at some of the bottom ones. But what we do now will make a big difference. And it's just like COVID-19, we blunt the curve. Climate change will get worse before it gets better, but we need to blunt or flatten that curve before, major transitions in energy and technology help to bail us out of this problem. And it's not all on technology. In order to make these changes fast enough to make those curves the more favorable ones, we have to change our behavior now. And this is what's so frustrating, because not everybody shares these priorities. And you all know the answer to this. We have to decrease our fossil fuel use. We have to level and redistribute our population growth. We have to address land use and biodiversity, like we've heard about planting trees and other things. And we have to do this equitably, which is what so many of you are concerned with in your work. So the big question that I was curious about is, why is change so difficult? Why is this problem met with so much resistance? And people say, yeah, I hear you, but they don't change their behavior on the institutional level, on the level of priorities of cities and governments, on the level of philanthropy. Like, why is this so hard? And being a neuroscientist, I was interested in, what is it about the brain? Why did I think that? Because, in my field, everything's about the brain. If you're a chef, everything's about food. And if you're a planner, I can't say what everything's about for you, because I know it's a diverse field. But in neuroscience, all we think about is the brain, and everything arises from that, because humans make their decisions with the equipment that we inherited from evolution to set our priorities. And the basic conclusion, I did what academics do when I was bothered by a question. I took a sabbatical and went back to school and had a bunch of really smart students working with me. And that was the beginning of the book that was mentioned earlier. So the findings are pretty simple. We're lacking in the neural equipment to perceive climate change. We can perceive a storm. We can perceive that it's hotter. We can't perceive the root cause, CO2. We have no sensation ability to perceive it. And so we get the information about it from experts using science that most people, including most of us, don't fully understand. In addition, to make it even harder, pro-environmental behavior change on the part of institutions, governments, countries that will help the problem, it's just not very rewarding. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. And pro-environmental decisions won't feel the same as most decisions that humans have been evolutionary adapted to make. Our brains, in fact, evolved for survival, and our brains did not spring as humans full-fledged from, a computer factory. They evolved on the backs of the nervous systems of other animals throughout a long period of time. And so in general, not for individual people at individual moments of life, we are predisposed, not hardwired, but predisposed to, in general, prioritize having more, getting more, storing more, like the squirrel, like the early humans. And in general, our nervous systems are predisposed to want and to go after and to be rewarded by more and more and more. And the problem is that this is now a conflict of interest for the survival of our species. And, do we need food like that? No, but during evolutionary time, fat, sugar, and salt were scarce, they were necessary. And if we didn't evolve sensors that made those really rewarding, we would not have survived, or those of us who did survive better than those of us who didn't. Now, I show this McMansion here, and I always am worried that it's the house of somebody in my audience. I hope it's nobody's house. Donnie, is that your house? If it is, I apologize. But the point is, does anybody need a house like that? And the answer is no, obviously. And it's a conflict of interest with the survival of our planet and our species. And here's the reason behind it. This was a thought exercise that my students and I came up with. And if you imagine a walk across the United States, starting in San Francisco and ending in the center of Times Square, and this represents the time that the planet has been in existence. So when you start in San Francisco, the planet has just formed. It takes you 40 days to walk across to the center of Times Square, which is now. It represents the present time. And that 40 days is by Google Earth walk speed. And to understand a little bit about the evolution of the nervous system, the first cells happened in Salt Lake City. Multicellular organisms happened in Iowa City, mammals in Scranton, PA, primates in Morristown, New Jersey, humans, 223 yards left to the end of your walk to the present time. And the Anthropocene, where carbon dioxide goes up so precipitously and climate change is caused, is when your big toe hits the last step. So to think a minute about your nervous systems evolved for the conditions back here. Your nervous system has not had time to think about this problem of rapid rise of CO2 and climate change and to have behaviors that are adapted to that problem. It just is too recent, and your brains are just evolved for challenges of another historical time. And to think about that in common experience, one way to think about how the reward system, which is what helps you make decisions, what's rewarding, it's not about what makes you feel good per se. It's about the reward system evolved to help you make decisions that helped you survive. It's to help you learn what it is that you need to survive. And one way to think about it sort of experientially is what's more fun. So what's more fun? You think about a new car, you think about the design, the make, the color, the interior. Is it more fun to think about that, or is it more fun to think about the mileage or, an electric version and how far it'll go on a charge? Like, I'm not saying it's not useful to think about the stuff on the right, but which is more fun? Likewise, is it more fun to think about decorating your house for a holiday, or is it more fun to think about putting in attic insulation? So the thing that is the fun is your reward system working the way evolution designed it. Another problem with pro-environmental behavior is it suffers from an agency problem. So hunter-gatherers, you went on a hunt, you gathered food, you got a response, an immediate thing. You were going to feed your family, your community. It's rewarding. There's cause and effect. You chipped a stone tool, there's cause and effect. You were bad at it, you got better at it, you got your tool, you could clean your skins off and work on your food. There was an immediate cause and effect. You built a shelter. That particular one is from ancient Ireland. Or even you're a surgeon. That's why we go into surgery, because we are impatient and we want an immediate, visible, tangible, socially acknowledged cause and effect that we did something, we made something, we created something. Now in the bottom, if you bike to work in Boston in December, like this picture, it's pretty cold and miserable. And do you see the effect of that decision on climate change? Do you see climate change getting better? Is the temperature down the next day? No, there is no cause and effect. And what you're giving up was much more convenient and easier. This is a recipe for difficult behavior change. Luckily, stuff is not our only reward. So when we talked about getting more and more and more, luckily humans evolved also to get rewarded by different activities. Problem solving, the child doing the puzzle. We love to problem solve. Altruism, helping other people. If we hadn't evolved that, we wouldn't have survived. If you're in healthcare doing surgery with a team and getting kids sending you pictures afterwards about they're better and the family is happy with you, that's really rewarding. If you are a planner, like many of you are, that's really rewarding. You're helping people. You're worried about equity. You're taking care of the underserved. This is very rewarding. And there is scientific evidence that the brain is rewarded by altruism. This happens to be a functional MRI picture of the brain lighting up under conditions of altruistic decision making. And in addition, the question is, if we're predisposed to more and more and more, how changeable is our brain? Can we change? And the answer that I came to in researching all of this was that there's good evidence that your brain system, your reward system, is malleable and it's gullible. And what do I mean by that? If our brains had not been designed to adapt to new circumstances, new cultures, new family situations, new leadership structures, new governments, new everything, new technology, we would not have survived. That's why we were able to spread all over the planet and inhabit virtually every place. So we had to be malleable. You have to be malleable through your lifespan because your own circumstances change. And you have to be malleable as a species because your cultural and environmental circumstances change. But we are extremely malleable, and this has been shown in extreme examples like anorexia, where the part of the brain that is rewarded by food in people with anorexia lights up for doing without food. That's a 180-degree switch showing the extreme malleability of your brain's reward system. Likewise, there are cultural influence on what we think is important and prioritized. And the example of the cats shown in the bottom right is an extreme example of this. In ancient Egypt, cats were deified. Why? In part because they kept the rats down in the granaries. In Europe in the Middle Ages, cats were tortured publicly. This was a big fun thing for the whole family to go to, watching cats be dropped into fires, held by their tails, screaming until they died. Why? Because they were told by religious authorities that the devil was in cats and that torturing the cat was like torturing the devil. So two extreme examples from deification to, devilification of the same animal. And that just shows how humans, and both of those were rewarding, can really switch what is considered rewarding. So let's switch here just a minute to which behaviors matter most. If we're trying to change behavior, which behaviors do we need to focus on? And this is only in high income countries, because obviously not, around the world, and even in our own country, people who are more disadvantaged don't have choices in a lot of this. But the top 5 list with respect to carbon dioxide emissions for individuals are the things you already know. Transportation, and many of you are trying to make cities and urban areas more walkable, more bikeable. You try to beef up public transit. You try to improve the infrastructure for electric vehicles. So transportation is a big one, as you know. Switching to a plant-based diet. So if you're a planner, people have to be able to get fresh fruits and vegetables, and I know a lot of you work on that. Home energy efficiency. If you're a renter, you know, that's not something you're going to be able to do. If you're a builder, a developer of rental units, well, if you make it energy efficient, gee, you put more outlay, but your tenants get the benefits. So there's what's called a split incentive, which I know many of you know about. One less airplane trip per year, because one cross-Atlantic or cross-country, coast-to-coast round trip of an airplane is 2 tons of carbon emissions per person per trip, which means that's your entire year's allocation with one trip. So this has been the focus in the medical field of a lot of people with respect to conferences, with respect to residency interviews, and other things that require a lot of transportation by air. Considering family size, this is a controversial issue, but having one more child is outweighing all of the others on this list with respect to its carbon impact. This is a delicate and controversial and complicated question, so I'll stop it with that. But if you just think about the things on this list, I would ask you, is this easy or difficult to change? And then a way to think about it is, are these changes rewarding? Is it, you know, rewarding to give up meat? Well, there may be a health co-benefit. Is it rewarding to bike to work? Well, it kind of depends. You can try to talk it up as a health benefit, because a lot of these changes actually are better for public health as well. But is that enough to incentivize people? It's still a tricky business. So I wanted to know then, what strategies work best for difficult behavior change? And I looked at 2 intractable problems: addiction on the individual level, and the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2014 as a cultural issue, because both of those are important. And there's several principles that many of you already know about things that have been shown in multiple studies and lots of experience as to what principles tend to work. So in general, positive works better than negative. Telling people don't do this doesn't work very well, whether it's addiction or whether it's changing your behavior around funeral practices when Ebola is a problem. Information needs to come from people you trust. Think about climate change. Information comes from people you don't know, you know, on the internet, that you don't trust, whose words you don't understand. It's a setup for lack of buy-in. Another principle is you get a substitute reward that is immediate and tangible for the thing you're giving up. That's what the 12-step programs are all about. And what reward do they tend to substitute for the one you're giving up? Social rewards. And that's because these are powerful. Among rewards, they are one of the most powerful that humans can experience. Making a public commitment. So when the mayor of your city says, we are going to do this, it's hard for them to back down. And it's been shown in multiple studies that making that public commitment, whether it's in a 12-step program or it's some other thing, in my world, it's hospitals making a commitment to decrease the carbon footprint of healthcare. It's harder to back down, and people tend to believe themselves when they make it publicly. Multiple behavior strategies at once and nudging and budging are other behavior change strategies that have been shown to work in certain circumstances. So that's behavior change in general. What about pro-environmental behavior? And again, if the people who are making decisions about instituting the kind of changes you're working on, these are humans with brains, and they have to make the decisions that enable you to do your work. And it's hard for them. The change that they're accepting has to be more rewarding than the alternative. And, you know, if they need to get voted into office, if they need to get promoted, if they need to get a bonus, if they need their board of trustees to think they're doing a good job, their rewards may be very different from what you find rewarding and what you think is important. So you have to help them here. And the principles that have been shown to work in pro-environmental behavior are doing things differently, not doing without. And especially that's true where you can make an economic argument. So if you can make an economic argument that the health of your community is going to be better because there's going to be less pollution with, you know, electrified public transit or whatever, if the person who has to pay the healthcare costs is part of the person who has to pay for the transition, it works great. The problem in many of our cities and constituencies is that they're 2 different pots of money. And this is because of our form of government and because of our separation of agencies. There can be financial incentives for businesses and institutions, and this can be because there are changing building codes. There are new regulations. There are different ways of measuring things. There are laws like, you know, the CHIP law, the IRA, and there may be public pressure campaigns where if you're dealing with elected officials, these public pressure campaigns from the young people, from, the health community. These can be helpful, and we can work with you sometimes to help in those ways. Then there's a concept called honeybee rewards, which is you may not even care about climate change. You may not even believe in climate change, but the benefits of the changes you're enacting are helpful for other reasons. So health benefits is one that is touted because the health co-benefits of decarbonization and green infrastructure are tangible and something most people care about. Similarly, with green space, the psychological benefits, the health benefits, even the cognitive benefits can be co-benefits that influence people who don't really care about the whole climate change equation. And it's really powerful to have social rewards from like-minded people and leaders. And these are my co-panelists and some of the organizers of this meeting. You got to count on and lean on each other, because sometimes that's the only reinforcement you're going to get when you're, fighting this uphill battle that you believe in and still want to make change in that. Another thing to keep in mind is, besides this more thing, everybody wants more money, they want more stuff. It doesn't even make us happy. And there are long-term, decades and decades of follow-up studies that say what make people have life satisfaction. And it's two ingredients. It's a sense of purpose, and it's your relationships. And I can imagine that many of you in this career, you have a sense of purpose, and it's the relationships of the people you work with, the successes you've had together that mean a great deal to you, plus the relationships with the people you serve. So the short term, more, it's very short term. It's designed that way by nature, but these things are what give you the long-term happiness. So in conclusion, pro-environmental behavior change, it's challenging from a neural point of view. It's challenging for the people whose views you are trying to change and the people you're trying to convince to go along with your recommendations. It won't feel like other rewards, and we need to substitute new rewards for the prior ones. The reward mechanism is inherently flexible. What's rewarding can be changed, but pro-environmental rewards are mostly social. They spread among people. There are shifts in cultural norms, and whether it's advocacy, economics, policy, you can make a difference, and the work you're doing is critically important because climate change really is our biggest problem as a species. We need to give people a positive vision for the future that's realistic. Climate change will get worse before it gets better, and we need to not lose our credibility by making it sound too rosy, but we also need to give people something they can look forward to, because otherwise humans won't change behavior unless they have a goal. So I'm going to stop there, and I appreciate your time. I hope I didn't go too far over.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Duham. I was very much looking forward to this presentation, and it did not disappoint. And although Dr. Duham is not a planner, I thoroughly believe that her work is critical to understanding how planners can sort of invoke positive change through better understanding how people think and react to climate change. So now I want to bring up Dr. Patrice Williams. She is an assistant research professor of participatory action research and provost impact fellow in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University. Her general research interest is examining how attributes of the physical and social environments, including urban planning policies, processes, and practice, contribute to health inequities among racially minoritized populations. And specifically, she uses community-driven approaches to address health inequities and housing insecurity pressures from green space redevelopment, climate exposures, and climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. So welcome, Dr. Williams, and if you could, looks like you have your presentation ready and set to go. Please proceed.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And a lot of what I'm going to present today kind of overlaps with even some of the work that Tina presented, but our earlier panelist as well. So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about my work today. So I'm just going to start with just a quick agenda. Just wanted to explain a little bit about the Healthy Neighborhood Study, which is one of the multiple arms of community-driven work that I'm a part of or doing. And then also talking about what is PAR. So a lot of people, I don't want to make the assumption that you know what that means. So I'm going to quickly identify it, but then also explain it from our perspective as people who are engaging in this work, what it means to us, what is our process, and then how is working, what's, I guess, talking again of Tina, like what's the benefit of working with residents to collaboratively analyze work and then determine what are the actions that can come from these findings. So very quickly, the Healthy Neighborhood Study is a product or the core project that kind of holds together the Healthy Neighborhoods Research Consortium, which is based across 9 different communities in the greater Boston area. You can see it on the right-hand side of the slide. It includes residents, 45 resident researchers. They're intentionally called resident researchers. There are equal collaborators in every aspect of the whole spectrum, from research design, determining what are our questions, all the way to analyzing the data to the end product of like, what are we going to do about it? It includes grassroots organizations that are based in these 9 different communities, state, academic, and regional partners, all again in the greater Boston area. We've been doing this work since 2015, and it is a multi-site longitudinal PAR study. And as far as we know, it's the largest mixed methods data set on from a resident's perspective on how neighborhood changes are impacting our health. A lot of our earlier work, which you're going to see in some of the videos I'm going to present later, talks a lot about gentrification, but as a group, we're moving more towards climate change. So the next step, I can imagine people wondering, like, how does this work? This consortium, the Healthy Neighborhood Study, you have residents, you have all these different people involved. And this is our best way of kind of visualizing what's happening. My role as an assistant professor at Northeastern is to play a facilitator. When I was previously at MIT, that was the role we also played there, was we are just a facilitator. We are not decision makers. The community residents, the community-based organizations, they are the decision makers regarding where is our focus moving forward. We have an advisory group, which includes like the Massachusetts Public Health Department, the Metro Area Planning Council, and other members as well. And then the 9 community partner organizations is giving an idea of like the types of different organizations that are involved. And then resident researchers are recruited to be a part of the study so that they are residents of these communities. They're engaging with their community members about things that are important to them, but then also regionally. And then they're also collecting data from residents within their larger communities, asking these questions that are very important to them. So that was just to give you a quick basis about the Healthy Neighborhood Study and the research consortium. But the next part is, what is PAR? What is this participatory action research? And so this video is going to explain from our perspective as members who are engaging in this work, what does PAR mean to us?
So when we say PAR, it means participatory action research. And that's what we're doing on the Healthy Neighborhood Study.
If we understand from the beginning that lived experience is expertise, and that we're taught and that's incorporated in our whole training experience, we would produce way more impactful work in my field instead of the same thing over and over again with a new name, but it's the same issues we continue to reproduce.
We all have valuable knowledge to bring to bear, and working together, we can both identify the right questions, carry out the right kinds of analysis, and identify the right types of solutions that can help move us forward.
Like in traditional research studies, there's someone who usually sits at a university or a college and they're studying something. So they might be studying healthy food access. And so they have a whole bunch of questions that they're trying to answer about food. And they might do that from their desk. So they're going out and asking questions, getting answers, but not necessarily sharing that data back with the community, not necessarily using it at a really local level to make changes that affect the people who they ask the questions of.
Extremely important that communities lead the research that's about their communities. For one, to break cycles of extraction and domination that typically happen in our communities, where they're sort of treated like a laboratory. They're treated like they can be experimented on, and it's usually by, tenured professors in these big Ivy League institutions coming in and just pulling data out from communities, and the communities themselves don't benefit.
I think the limit of PAR is essentially kind of the way it kind of meets with the status quo. The status quo is a process, again, that often wants to move from a place of just being announced, things are just moving forward, slight adjustments will be made, and PAR as a barrier presents something that is much more open, much more involved, and much more empowering to residents, that a lot of current processes don't really have a great place to fit that in.
When we do participatory action research, we're asking those questions with the people who are really impacted, with with the people who are experiencing the neighborhood change. We're saying, what are the questions that are important for you guys to answer in order to make the changes that you want to see in your community? And that's what participatory action research is. So we're working together to ask the questions, to figure out, you know, what are we going to do to collect this data? Do we need to do surveys because we need to hear from lots of people? Do we need to do observational data collection? Do we need to go out and count things or take pictures? And all of that comes from the people most impacted.
When the community leads the research, they can be assured that it's valuable to them. That's sort of point number one. The other is that it's just better research. When you do PAR and it's led by communities, you're surfacing new needs and challenges and opportunities and insights that otherwise would be completely missed without a community perspective.
So that's what we're doing on participatory action research. Like, lots of people are bringing in different types of expertise. So we have our partners at MIT, and they're the ones often behind the desk crunching those numbers, really getting the data ready for us to look at it and analyze it together. Then we have our community partners and our resident researchers who are the ones who recognize, you know, what's going on in the community. They're on the ground. They see what changes are happening.
We come up with solutions. They don't actually have an impact. How can they have an impact if we're not talking to the people who we're trying to do this for? But we take on this patriarchal perspective of, I know best for you, I'm the expert, I got this, I don't need your expertise or your experiences to influence the work that I'm producing. And I think that's fundamentally wrong.
When we're usually hit with climate change issues, we're hit the hardest in the neighborhoods that have less resources, but we're also being gentrified at this time, which means they're destroying green spaces. And when you destroy green spaces, you create more heat islands. You create more heat islands, you create more of the warming. It's a trickle down cycle. It's one of the things that's gonna continue to happen because people are unaware of, even in the neighborhoods, they're unaware of how they're even being affected. They see the changes, but they don't know what is in charge of that change.
So they're the ones really helping to build the questions together. It's really focused on the actions that we need to take in order to make an impact in gentrification, to build healthy communities, to prevent people from being displaced.
As it impacts community health, PAR feels like a really, really well-suited research tool to not only understanding care, but to understanding how to increase more equitable outcomes for caregivers and their communities.
So we just got done fighting these people and we're still fighting them about the trees that are there already, and they never even consulted the neighborhood. And then they're also trying to install a turf, which is gonna further increase our heat island, all right? But it seems as if people don't have enough information to understand what's going to happen with this turf and destroying the grass that's underneath.
And what PAR does is it helps us build a framework to build a common answer. And so you come from individual experiences and you don't know how they fit into the world, and you don't know how they connect to what other people are feeling in other places or of other generations. And what PAR does is allow you to build the connections between those experiences, and in doing that, you can learn a lot more. And what you learn a lot more about is systems. You learn a lot more about processes. You don't just have little sort of like snapshots in the dark. You get a much richer and more colorful picture of what's going on. And so I think PAR it's really useful for interpreting data, but it's equally useful for building theory, for building explanations and building narratives. And those are really more useful to understanding and building shared understanding beyond just our research team, like with the people in their communities, with the people that they work with. It's the ability to go from data all the way to a narrative that matters to people, that matters to the circumstances of their own lives, that I think makes PAR really well suited to data analysis, and that makes our approach to data analysis really well suited to, I hope, the action plans and priorities that people are all going to be working on in the coming months.
So just really quickly, based off this is our PAR process. So it starts at building relations. And like I said, it goes all the way to the action component. But the parts I'm going to talk about really quick today is like the data gathering. So in the previous video, we're talking about we're gathering data to answer questions that are most pertinent to residents that we can make meaning out of it. But then how does that lead to the action where we're actually able to address these issues, not just talk about them?
Sure. So the first type of data we collect is the survey, and we basically ask the resident researchers what was important to them, what kind of information they wanted to capture that was related to health.
So I'm glad you came. I got a whole lot of stuff I got to say. First off, with gentrification.
The second piece is we collect data via interview. And the interviews are different because they're both longer. They take about an hour and a half and dive deeper into the topics of the surveys. And we also then interview the same people each year in a longitudinal cohort fashion, which is helpful for people who have been displaced to see where they go and what their lives are like.
Because when you got high rent in the neighborhood, you're not gonna stay here.
Yeah.
You're not gonna stay anywhere that you're not wanted.
To put it short and sweet, a lot of the seniors are losing their housing. A lot of us are being offered a few dollars for our homes. And then once we sell, we're not able to get back into the neighborhood.
We need to step back and look, as a system, is this neighborhood working for people? And some of the signals in our data that tell us whether a neighborhood is working for people include things like, do people say they feel ownership over the changes that are happening in that neighborhood? And this idea about whether or not you feel that those changes happening in your neighborhood are for you, this was an insight that came directly from the resident researchers and community partners in the Healthy Neighborhood Study. It's not a concept that's really been on the radar screen of any academics doing work on neighborhoods and health, but it's absolutely essential.
And finally, this year we began with our observational data collection. And this was a way to allow resident researchers to collect data during the time of COVID, but it also gives us an opportunity for more action-oriented data collection.
Say, this is the challenge that is ahead of us. What do we need to know in order to tackle that challenge and to create the research itself? And institutions in service of community should then wrap around and support that.
So as you can see, we initially was very focused on various topics that we wanted to do and really trying to understand what's going on in their neighborhood. Do we have ownership of it? And now we're like, can we do something similar with really trying to focus and understand climate change? So this is the last video, just trying to explain why are we moving more towards climate change now?
Experience in thinking through what's strong about the way of asking the question, what's a problem we might run into if we ask the question this way, that they know what's at their disposal in terms of methodology. So why would you do interviews? What are they good at? What are they not so good at? Why would you do a survey? What is it good for? What is it not so good for? Why would you download a data set? What are some things that can happen when you bring on a partner, and how to navigate those things? Making sure that we have gotten to a point where all of the sites are able to articulate in their own voice, calling attention to the problems that they have deemed most important, and how climate justice needs to look in their communities in order for us to be going into the next summer and the next set of heat waves, doing work that is deliberately meant to advance racial justice has to be at the center of any of the solutions that are put forth. So I think it's really, really urgent that we get to the point of saying climate change for me is about housing security. Climate change for me is about financial security. Climate change for me is about racism. Climate change for me is about, all of the daily experiences that people are already, working through, again, with a set of really ingenious strategies, but naming it as such if they so choose, and knowing what the alternative vision looks like so that we can organize, co-create a different future.
And so the Healthy Neighborhood Study is about asking the questions
that are most important to the people who live there and the advocates who have been working for decades to preserve and protect and advance those neighborhoods.
So just to give you really highlight example of some of the things that we've had at our collaborative data analysis, where we just, the question that residents were asking is, how do worries about extreme weather events vary with financial security? And what we generally found is that people who are experiencing somewhat hard to very hard time covering their expenses, they're more worried about climate-related displacement risk, flooding, and extreme heat compared to those who are having an easier time covering their current expenses. And then when they were asking questions about, again, this extreme weather, is there any differences by neighborhood? Generally, most people are worried about extreme cold and climate-related displacement, but we're also seeing in certain communities, they're more worried about some things than others. And then when we're talking about too hot, like experiences, their homes being too hot in their neighborhood, we were also seeing that at least 50% of the people surveyed in Chelsea, Dorchester, Mattapan, and New Bedford felt that their homes were too hot during a heat wave. So these were some sites that they thought was really interesting, and what can we do about this? So in addition to this, we pulled in some interview data to discuss with them, like how people are feeling about the different levels of control in the face of climate change. And what they generally found is that a lot of people are talking about it, but they feel like they have no control. They feel like no matter what they do, this is happening and they can't make any changes or actions to address this. Then there are other people who are saying that the way that it's framed to them, it's only talked about individual actions. So Tina gave some examples of things we commonly hear, like plant-based diets, moving towards other forms of modes of transit, but they don't feel like enough is being talked about collective action. How can we work together to address this? So as an example, one of our community partners in Everett took some of this information, applied for EPA grant, got it, and they had these community workshops. And what they were noticing in their community was that people were not seeing the connection between heat, housing, and health. And so part of it was educating them. What is this connection? How is this development and this displacement that they were seeing in their communities, or cultural change, was also connected to heat, and what were the impacts on health? And this actually led to a paper that they produced and is currently under review to be published. And these were just like the high level findings that we found from that paper. So just quick summary of everything. Why does this matter? It builds community power. Communities have a right to know and be heard about their research, like was brought up earlier in the other panelists' presentations, but also earlier in the video. Communities can leverage these institutional resources, whether there are researchers that are engaging in the government or institutions, but the information is not being shared with them and understand how it could be influencing their decision making. But then also communities have valuable information themselves to share, and their voices are often not being heard and treated as if it's anecdotal. So there's this exchange that needs to happen in a way that is actually very beneficial. And I saw a lot of comments while I'm trying to present about a website. So this is our website. If you want to check us out, almost all the videos I think that I presented is on the website. So you'll be able to see it's one general location. And thank you so much for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, Patrice. That was really very, very, very powerful. The videos were wonderful. Thank you for that. It was really also inspiring to see so many young people involved in the Healthy Neighborhood Study. And I was particularly struck by the connection between personal feelings of belonging and permanency in neighborhoods. And I thought about how that impacts engagement and the work that public planners do on a routine basis to resolve issues, not just climate change, but other issues as well, and how the connection to a neighborhood and the engagement, it might impact their ability or their willingness to engage when they feel maybe they don't have a sense of permanency in that area. It was also interesting to think about the back-to-back presentations, and you mentioned and you went back to Tina's presentation as well, but how to frame rewards for different populations that have different worries and different priorities. So a question for all of us to think about. I would like to now introduce Matthew Tejeda, who joins us from the Natural Resources Defense Council by way of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. At the NRDC, Matthew is a Senior Vice President of Environmental Health, where he oversees programs focused on toxics, air, water, and adaptation. But at the EPA, he served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Environmental Justice within EPA's National Program Office for Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. And during his more than 10 years leading EPA's EJ program, he was responsible for all aspects of EJ work throughout the agency, most significantly over the development of an array of EJ grants and technical assistance vehicles and development and deployment of EJ Screen. So there were some questions about EJ Screen, some references to it in the previous panel, and Matthew's going to speak a little bit more to his experience in working in that program. So Matthew.
Great. Thanks so much, Donnie, and glad to be here and really enjoyed Anne, Christine, and Patrice's previous presentations, especially a lot of what Patrice was talking about in terms of the real priority on centering how public decisions are made on the lived experiences of actual community members, especially those communities, Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, low-income communities that have been and continue to be the most impacted negatively by public decisions, whether that is receiving the excess burden or not receiving their equitable share of things like public investments and benefits that flow from government programs. So very happy to talk about any of that. I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly to preserve some more time for question and answer. So I only have a few slides here. And what I wanted to do, especially for this, the planning community, is to really focus in on what I think are two of the most salient issues in the environmental health, equity, and justice space right now that are really going to cause, I believe, over the next 20 years, a complete revolution, a sea change in terms of how we view environmental health, environmental quality, environmental regulation, and the role at the end of that, but very central to it, in terms of what planners do, which is such an important role in our society at so many levels of government. So one of the things I wanted to start with, though, was just to talk about one of the things that happened less than a year ago. So President Biden has really very clearly been setting a new standard in terms of advancing equity and justice through the executive branch of the federal government. He has signed at least a dozen executive orders that speak either in whole or in part to issues of racial equity and environmental justice, including the first wholesale update of what was really the only previous executive order on environmental justice that was signed in 1994 by President Bill Clinton, Executive Order 12898. So in April of last year, President Biden signed Executive Order 14096. And one of the fundamental, seemingly quite simple things that the executive order did last year was it created a standard definition for environmental justice for the United States government. Prior to last year, the entire United States government basically defaulted to using EPA's definition, which had been created back in the early 1990s. And a lot of the definition we have today is really borrowing from and lifting up what was a very good definition for many decades, but it made a couple of pretty significant changes to it. One, it expanded the very classic definition of which communities we are specifically talking about when we talk about issues of environmental justice. So, focusing in on Black and Brown communities, low-income communities, Indigenous communities, but adding disabled people, because a lot of the same issues that have for so long been in front of those other communities that are the classic ones in environmental justice are similar when you look at communities of disabled individuals. So disability was added as one of the real core focus areas for environmental justice in this executive order. It also swapped out one of the key terms. Kind of the two pillars of environmental justice have always been focused around meaningful involvement, something that Patrice in her videos and what she shared was really getting at what it means to meaningfully involve communities in the decisions that are going to impact their communities. The other idea, though, and the one that was really has been much less developed over the 30 plus years of practicing environmental justice throughout the United States, is that idea of what was previously called fair treatment. And that idea of fair treatment has really tripped people up for a long time because it uses that word fair, right? So a lot of folks who really want to do things in a just way, they think, well, if I treat everyone fairly, then I'm doing justice work, right? Everyone's being treated the same. And what that does is it misses the fact that for generations, in many instances, especially when you're talking about indigenous communities and Black and brown communities in the United States, they have been unfairly treated since the beginning, since before the beginning of our country. You know, going back to the arrival of European colonists in North America, they have been unfairly treated, right? So if you apply the principle of fairness now, you know, you're treating people the same without recognizing that they have not been treated the same. So you're just locking this into place. So this new executive order actually updated that word fair treatment and instead used just treatment, right? Because that idea of justice recognizes that people have been treated unfairly forever. And by practicing equity and looking for unjust existing systemic and structural issues in our society, you can actually over time bring about fairness, which is really the end goal that one day we hope to have, equality and fairness. But you have to practice equity and justice to get there. One of the other things, and this is really what I'm going to focus on for the next couple of minutes, that it really focused in on were two really critical things that are happening. One of which we've been talking a lot about here, which is climate change. The other of them, though, is cumulative impacts. So to talk specifically about cumulative impacts, this is a huge deal in environmental justice terms and in just environmental health protection and regulation. When we say cumulative impacts, what we're really trying to get at is taking the reality that people live in and bringing it into the public decision-making space, whether that's looking at legislation or how we spend taxpayer dollars, how we issue rules, how we pursue enforcement and compliance or remediation of contaminated sites or anything across the public health spectrum, right? Actually bringing the reality of communities, especially those communities that have been most overburdened and are most vulnerable to any threats, into our decision-making. It seems pretty common sense if you haven't been involved in environmental health protection, but it's actually a revolutionary idea because the entire foundation of environmental health protection in the United States doesn't posit that reality as its starting point. Instead, public health protection posits that average individuals are exposed to individual pollutants from individual pollution sources. So typically when people are out there looking at things like an air permit, which actually permits a polluting facility to pollute a certain amount of pollution into the environment, what folks are considering is, well, is that facility and the pollution it creates in a vacuum of any other reality okay? Right? It doesn't consider the fact, well, where is that facility going to locate? Are there other facilities like that facility nearby? Are there other highways or ports or rail yards? Are there contaminated sites? Is there access to healthcare in that area? What is the vulnerability of the community to any level of pollution? Right? The whole system of environmental health protection doesn't consider that in the vast majority of the decisions we make. So thinking about all of those environmental factors, thinking about those socioeconomic issues that can really key folks in on, well, what is the vulnerability of an individual or an entire community? Looking at things like critical services and the ability of folks to have access to things like healthy food, healthcare, transit and transportation, good education. Taking all of those things into consideration is that idea of cumulative impacts that this administration, for the first time, has actually made a clear public commitment to advance consideration of cumulative impacts in the actual public decision-making of the federal government and throughout the entire environmental public health regulatory system of the United States. That is going to take some time to figure out because we have a 50-plus-year-old system that is developed through policies and practices and precedents for decades, much if not all of which has to get unwound to then take this cumulative impacts reality in hand and then restart figuring out our rules, our permits, our cleanups, our enforcement and compliance issues. How do you take that actual reality that exists, starting with the folks whose reality is most challenging, that is most threatening to their public health, and what do you do about it? Now, the issue for planners specifically is, and I'm saying this from over a decade of experience at EPA, actually looking out across the United States, is if the federal government does everything it can on cumulative impacts and the powers and the authorities that are in hand of the federal government, if we do everything we can, and even if all of the states that are also involved in environmental public health protection and regulation, even if every single state does everything it can to bring cumulative impacts and those realities into what the states decide and what the states do, you still won't even have cracked at least 50% of the problem. Because in my opinion, the majority of actually bringing the reality of cumulative impacts into public decision-making are going to be local decisions. They're going to be decisions that happen at the city and the county and the municipal planning organization levels. And that's where planning comes in. If we really start to consider what the cumulative impact on communities is from being exposed to pollution, from being disinvested in, and from the histories of those things that have accumulated over generations in those communities, we're going to have to make completely different choices about how we plan, how we make decisions about, well, maybe the school doesn't go there, even though that's the most affordable piece of land, because half the kids that wind up going there are going to have asthma, and we're really just externalizing the cost of that cheap land on a bunch of kids who are going to have really poor health outcomes for the rest of their lives, right? So how do we actually plan for that? How do we make public decisions about the built environment, about zoning, and all of those other things that cascade out of those decisions at the local level? How are we going to take that reality of cumulative impacts into that level of decision-making in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of local governments and planning departments that exist across the United States? It's a huge challenge just trying to do it at one agency at the federal level. But it's going to very quickly get to the place where it's really about how do we support local government in making better decisions at the local level. And planners, as a profession and as public servants, are going to be at the very heart of actually advancing that reality in this space. It's a huge issue that is happening and is going to take most of the rest of our lives, if we're lucky, if it actually moves forward at some pace, to actually figure all this out. Now, one of the things that can really help, and as was mentioned earlier, that I hope folks are using, and if not, I hope you're getting in there and figuring out how to use it, is EJ Screen. And I'm not saying you have to use EJ Screen, but I think you should, because these screening tools that actually take environmental data, health data, climate data, and start to combine them with that idea of vulnerability, right? Taking those socioeconomic factors and combining it with all those other data sets that we have, so you can really start to see, well, what are the impacts on communities and how vulnerable or how susceptible are those communities at the same time? So you can really start to find out, well, where are the places that are going to have the greatest need and the biggest challenges? And if we're going to act equitably, right, those are the places we start with. And that hasn't been the case throughout the entire public health regulatory endeavor, right? We've tried to do the most good for the most number of people, and we haven't worried about the folks on the edges of that. Those are those environmental justice communities, and they have been left behind. They have not enjoyed the benefits of a cleaner environment that so many of us have enjoyed over the last 50 years. For many of those communities, their environments have actually gotten worse as a result of cleaning up the environments for everyone else. So that's part of what we really need to focus in on, are where are those communities who need and deserve our attention the most, whose challenges, whose demands should be prioritized in this time. And especially at the local planning level, it is so incredibly important and powerful for folks to understand that interplay and to use tools like EJ Screen or any of the other tools. The Health and Human Services has a tool out there now. There's a climate economic justice screening tool from the White House. Many states have designed their own tools, which have much richer state-based data than there is at the national level to actually look at this stuff. Use any of them, use all of them. I like to say that EJ Screen is a great gateway tool because many of those other tools have actually been designed using an EJ Screen backbone to them and then adding in other unique elements. So EJ Screen is a really great way to get to know how to use these sorts of screening tools and interact with these data sets so that you can actually start to do the thing that those tools have chiefly been designed for, which is to ask better questions. Right? These screening tools are screening tools. They are not giving you answers, but they're enabling you to ask really precise questions. And they're taking what previously would have been years worth of analytical work out of the equation and just giving you that data in the way that folks need in order to ask those better questions. Now, the other part of this that is kind of on a parallel collision course with bringing cumulative impacts into environmental health protection across the United States and doing so in an equitable, just way is this idea of climate adaptation, which is starting to come into greater and greater prominence, right? We know now that the climate is changing, and folks increasingly every month, every week across the United States and across the world, people are waking up to the fact that, as Anne-Christine was showing or was talking about, right, they can't intellectualize climate change, but they know when when their house is flooding, right? They know when their kid can't go outside because the wildfires have turned it black outside because there's so much smoke. These sorts of things are now confronting folks in ways that we can really start to engage with, to wake up to. It's been a long time coming, though. In the climate space, most of us who work on it for a very long time, we have been very focused on mitigating for climate change. And we're continuing to do that. And that is still a huge priority to try to slow down climate change by removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But we know the climate is already changing in ways that we are not ready for. And we must start to adapt our communities to things like flooding, like water scarcity, the flip side of flooding, right, and sea level rise, to things like habitat loss through issues like permafrost melting, through things like heat, which is going to be one of the biggest killers on planet Earth, just heat, excessive heat. And how do we deal with that? And who's mostly impacted by it? Well, it just so happens that the communities that are most impacted by the changing climate and are going to need the most help adapting to that change are the same communities that are going to be at the center of bringing cumulative impacts into our traditional environmental public health regulatory systems. And again, we're going to need planners at the very root of solving for these issues because it's going to deal with the built environment. It's going to deal with access to things like green space and tree canopy, dealing with issues of overland flooding, dealing with issues of access to actual good natural resources. Those are all going to be things that, regardless of what happens at the federal level or at the state level, the majority of the game is going to be had at the local level, where local decisions get made about public investments, about protecting and prioritizing the needs of communities, using investments in the right way, and as Patrice was sharing, doing so in full light and view and participation of the communities who are most impacted so that we can actually make those planning, investment, and built environment decisions that understand and meet the needs of the communities that have the greatest needs. I'm going to stop there. I think I talked longer than I intended as well, which is a bit of a theme today, and pass it back to Donnie.
A theme indeed, but no problem. All of it was very good information, Matthew. So thank you very much for your presentation. I know a lot of planners here and participants in this webinar have used EJ Screen quite extensively. It's really great to see the progress that EJ Screen has been made, that has been made to EJ Screen over the course of the several years, the updates, the inclusion of climate data, for example, et cetera. So thank you for your presentation. In the interest of time, I want to move to Fleming Elamine, who is the Director for the Office of Planning within FTA's Office of Planning and Environment, where he oversees administration of metropolitan and statewide transportation processes, planning related discretionary grants, GIS data analysis and mapping, and travel forecast. Prior to joining the FTA, though, Fleming worked as the livability team leader in the Office of Human Environment at the Federal Highway Administration, where he provided oversight for complete streets implementation, including bicycle and pedestrian planning, recreational trails, and transportation alternatives. weren't quite sure that Fleming would be able to join us today, but we're very glad to have him. So Fleming, if you could start your presentation. And I will say that we're coming to the end of panel number 2. We may not have questions, time for question and answers, but feel free to put your questions within the Q&A tool within Zoom, and our panelists will try to answer those questions to the best of their ability within the tool. Thank you very much. And Fleming?
Okay.
Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to get organized here. Just 1 second. There's some technical difficulties here. Let me try this one more time. Okay, for the sake of time, I think I'm just going to get started here and just run through a couple slides here because I know we're at the end of the day, and I wanted to try to just share a few things with you. As mentioned, my name is Fleming Elamine, serving as the Office Director for the Office of Planning at FTA Headquarters Office in Washington, D.C. And today I just wanted to take a few moments to share 2 things. One, how we're working to incorporate climate and health considerations in public transportation planning, but also public transportation operations. And so I'll just quickly go through a couple tools and resources that we have on both fronts. And then if we do have time for Q&A at the end. Just real quickly, are my slides advancing, Donnie?
Yep, they are.
Okay, thank you. So just very quickly, I'm going to first start with our Sustainable Transit for Healthy Community Challenge. This kicked off a couple years ago, and it was really started to try to help our transit agencies think more seriously about their climate impact, specifically as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions. And so in 2021, let me go to the next slide really quickly. Yeah. So yes, in 2021, we started this challenge and put out a call to all of our recipients to consider developing a climate action plan. And essentially what this did was, it was in response, first of all, to the Biden-Harris goal of a 50 to 52% reduction from the 2005 levels in economy-wide net GHG pollution in 2030. And so that was the framework for this challenge. What we have done since that time is actually worked with agencies on how to do the climate action plan. We've also discussed strategies for them moving their fleets to electrification or zero emissions. And we also document best practices in that regard. And each year, we've actually acknowledged the transit agencies that have made progress on this. They've initiated measurable goals to achieve their greenhouse gas emission targets. And generally at the American Public Transportation Association annual meeting in the fall, we will acknowledge the recipients for that given year. So really quickly, this is just a little bit more information on that challenge. Again, we provide technical assistance. We host a series of webinars. We have a template for climate action plan, host a number of office hours to help with this. But it really comes from a place of helping to, if there are transit fleets that are still running exclusively on fossil fuels, to shifting them to low or no emissions fleets that can be electrification or other means other than fossil fuels. And again, this is the third round or third phase that we've done this. We announced in earlier this month, and we're looking for plans to be submitted by March 1st. And I put this QR code on the slide for those that are interested, or if you have transit or public transportation providers in your region we certainly would encourage you to share this with them to get them engaged if they're not already. So next slide. So really quickly, I'll just go over a couple tools relating to this that we have put out on our website. One is to kind of help transit agencies track their greenhouse emissions, and then also the benefits of going to electrification. And if there's questions about health or environment benefits, these tools really bring it home. So first, this greenhouse gas emission tool basically does an assessment. It is essentially a spreadsheet, but has several formulas and calculations, which estimates the partial life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions and the energy consumption used in the construction, operation, and maintenance phases of a project across select transit modes. Based on general project information, the tool can calculate annual greenhouse gas emissions by project phase. And so this is essentially kind of assessment of where things are with existing fleets, but it does provide some data if agencies didn't already have this at hand. We find it very useful to kind of get an assessment of where they are and how they can kind of set some targets for better or reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So secondly, I wanted to discuss the another tool, which is somewhat related, but this is specifically the transit bus electrification tool. It allows users to estimate partial life cycle greenhouse gas emission savings associated with replacing standard bus fleets with low or zero emission transit buses. And so again, this is another tool that is similar to the greenhouse gas tool I just mentioned, but this is specifically looking at electrification and the benefits thereof when those transitions are made. And again, we have technical assistance and some templates to help agencies if they are interested in considering converting their fleets. So now I'll transition from some of the operational means that we're trying to encourage considerations of climate or sustainability and resilience to more typical planning type projects. And first and foremost, I'll jump right into our transit-oriented development. We've had a pilot program for transit-oriented development plan since 2014, actually. So we're in our 8th round of funding. Actually, this past August, we announced the amount of nearly $13.4 million in competitive grants, and we're currently reviewing those applications. Essentially, this program is focused on building up density around planned transit stations or corridors. There's a focus on increasing affordable housing and addressing homelessness within transit station and corridors. But it also presents opportunity to think more strategically about how to increase opportunities for walking, biking, and rolling, and increasing connectivity to and from transit stations. Some of the focuses of this program are to address anti-displacement, consider equity and equitable outcomes, as well as climate change. And essentially, we are the executive goals or executive orders that Matthew mentioned, we're also focused on those, as well as Executive Order 14008 on addressing the climate crisis, and Executive Order 13985, which is focused on equity and addressing underserved and underprivileged communities. So that's just really a quick overview of our transit-oriented development program. I'll get into more of the health benefits here. As I mentioned, since this program has been enacted, we've awarded over $100 million to about 129 projects throughout the country. And again, the bipartisan infrastructure law, or BIL, supplied $68 million over 5 years between FY22 and FY26. So each year we put out a call for proposals, and we've gotten a pretty good response. But this slide just kind of indicates some of the things that we're focused on addressing with the program. In addition to it being, thinking more about like creating more walkable and compact developments around transit, it also has the ability to address more climate-specific strategies. And what I mean by that is, at some points, there's consideration of curb space management, incorporating charging infrastructure within a corridor as they're considering TOD. And so those are some of the things that we help them plan and provide some case studies on how that's been done in the past. But essentially, we're using this program to highlight the health and climate benefits from doing this type of development, or at least thinking through it. Very much related to that is our complete streets planning. There's been a big push at USD DOT to advance complete streets. Both the Transit Administration and the Federal Highway Administration have been working jointly to help localities, regions, and state DOTs implement or adopt complete streets plans and policies. We also have, for the first time, this is also through BIL, if a region or a locality or recipient of FTA engages in complete streets planning activities, they are eligible to receive a waiver of the federal share requirement. And that's outlined on the slide at the top right. We produced a Dear Colleague letter back in March, which specifies the activities that are eligible and how to go about receiving that. But it's just, again, a push to encourage complete streets development nationwide. Again, we have case studies. There's a national assessment of complete streets efforts to date, as well as we have a discretionary grant program, Safe Streets and Roads for All, which again provides other opportunities to consider the state of existing street networks and how to make them more safe. And one implementation activity relating to that is how to create more safer routes to school using public transit service through multiple activities. And so it's both an implementation component to this Safe Routes to School for All, as well as a planning component. And there's more information through the link here. And so with that, I'll just kind of wrap up. This is a resource slide from several of the resources I mentioned previously. Again, I didn't have a chance to go into all of these, but I certainly hope that you'll have receive these slides and be able to look through this and get more information on what was covered. And finally, just closing out with this, our mission, vision, and values at FTA. So just wanted to go over that quickly, and here's my contact information. Thank you.
Thank you, Fleming. Thank you very much to panelists as part of panel number 2. Again, if anybody that's participating in the webinar has any questions, put them in the Q&A. We'll do our best to respond to them. But right now, I'd like to invite Shannon Roberts, who's going to kick us off with a closing remarks and some fireside chats.
Sounds great. Thanks, Donnie. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shannon Roberts. I'm a senior urban planner at Jacobs and the co-chair of the Partnerships Committee for the APA Sustainable Communities Division. And I'm excited to lead this discussion. It's our last session and our first fireside chat for the 3rd Annual Symposium, focusing on climate change and equity. I'm joined by Melissa, Patrice, and Tina from our earlier sessions. So welcome, ladies. And Prahalad, could you make us in presentation mode, the 3 of us with our cameras on, or the 4 of us?
Yeah.
Well, that's happening. You know, there were a lot of threads that were woven through this afternoon or morning, depending where you are. And I thought it was really interesting, kind of the undercurrents, right, of when we're thinking about health equity and climate change. And it seems, you know, I was really struck by, you know, racism is a public health emergency. That was one of the early statements. I also really was struck by Robin's comment about extractive in our work and not sharing the outcomes. We're asking for all this information, and Patrice, you talked about that too. So you know, everybody comes to life through their specific lens and their specific experiences. And I always love learning new things, and I definitely learned some today, like the big toe analogy of where we are in the evolution. And apologies, Tina, for summing it up that way. But I'm going to stop talking, and hopefully we'll be able to see all of your faces big on the screen here in a minute. But let's talk about what we learned. So who wants to jump in first as we have this discussion?
I'm just gonna start by responding to your, like, what was your summary or some things that jumped out at you. What was interesting to me is seeing all the different presentations that happen, and at some point interacting with those various things or seeing how they've changed and evolved over time. I remember Brace. I was part of the Florida Brace program when that was back in 2016, I think, or like knowing Partnership in Southern Equity, and was trying to involve them in work I was doing in Atlanta when I lived in Atlanta, or just like seeing these different perspectives and how things have changed over time has been really amazing. But then going back to your work about extractive, and even seeing like in the chat, there was a comment made about like how, like, really wanting to understand how is data being accessible to communities. Like, we're saying don't be extractive, but give examples of that. And so like in our case, the residents control who has access to their data. So it is in a place that they have access to, but if anybody outside of the Healthy Neighborhood Study, because all of the members are part of the IRB, if anyone outside of that wants access, there has to be, they want to know how you're going to use the data. They want to review if you're going to do any publications. They want to be able to see it, to see if they want that narrative going along with the data that they've been, collecting and using. So that's one thing. Another form is, instead of always asking us, like, because we have it in a way to preserve, the whole IRB and human subjects regulations, we've created data dashboards. So they were part of that whole design process. Instead of having them adjust to a data dashboard, there was one custom made to, how is this most useful to you? Where if you want to look at the different variables and look at relationships and how they may differ by your community versus another, creating a website where they can go to and get this information at any point that they want to, as opposed to like, going through the process of like, okay, what exactly you need, and, generating that for them. So there's different ways of like creating ownership and accessibility there. It's their narrative, it's their story. Any analyses I do, they approve it. And then we will put it on the website, what they're okay with being public facing and things like that. So these are just examples of ways that we've been doing things to make sure it is their story, it's their narrative, it's their data, and they decide how it's going to be used.
I would say that I was struck throughout the day of the parts that I could hear of the commitment level of so many people, each approaching similar problems from, using different tools or perspectives or different roles, but in common having just an enormous amount of perseverance, because this can be really frustrating work, right? It can be really a hard slog where other people that pull the purse strings oftentimes have different priorities. And you may have a little burst of something that comes through that works and you can accomplish something. And then, this is true in scientific research as well. Then, you're back looking for soft money. And it's really, it's a slog. It's really difficult. But the people that we heard from today, they have passion. They have different skills. And this is another reason from a brain point of view of how we survived as a species. Nature ended up distributing talents among people. Rats all have kind of pretty similar abilities, but humans are really variable about who's a good communicator, who's a good data analyzer, who's a good ethics sounding board, who's particularly good at empathy, and relating to others. And each of these people have something to bring to the table for these really hard efforts. I mean, climate change, equity, social justice, working for the underserved's benefit. These are hard issues. If they were easy, we would have solved them by now. And so I'm just struck with how nature created this kind of diversity of talents. And so many of these efforts rely on those different talents working together as a team. So I think that Shannon was one of the things that struck me.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the ability to work together as a team and the opportunities to find those different teams that we work with. And I think each time that builds a different set of skills that we can drive forward. The other thing I think it does is build the steps of the system in that can be done locally in order to create more and more people who are thinking about this issue in a way that they're thinking about it in a way that something can be done about it. And I think that that starts to add up over time. Dr. Williams, when I was listening to your work, it was very reminiscent to some work that I've done in the past. And I think there's multiple things that happen in a community process like that. There's the data that's created. There's also the capacities that are created between people as they work on one project successfully, do a next project. Those capacities build over time. For me, that's really what I see happening in the movement across the country, focused on this idea of the intersection of health and planning, the intersection of climate and planning, in ways that can be, I think, really powerful. And I think, I don't believe progress on anything is linear. And so while I know that that's difficult, I think there's some normalizing we can do about that. That would be good for communities and good for professional networks, especially because so much of the work that communities do is based on that soft money that Tina mentioned, right? Having to string together resource after resource. I think it's really important for the systems that fund that kind of work, one, to find ways that are sustainable funding streams, like we've done for some things like affordable housing and other kinds of structures, that you would have a long-term durable funding stream. I think that's important. That's one of some of the work that we do, is campaigning for that. But the other piece would be, is that when a community coalition hits a challenge, a change, a bump, that we see that as part of the long-term work of community work, and not a problem that shows that something doesn't work. Yeah.
I just want to add something that you said, Melissa, to tie back in something Tina said earlier, the different rewards. Like, there's sometimes very social rewards to people that engage. And so you mentioned like the increased capacity that's happening. One of the biggest feedback that we always get is people, when they engage in this work and seeing not only the increasing capacity, they're like, wow, I made a difference. Like, I'm learning something. I have something I could share with someone. And just one of the biggest things is like people who are engaging, the work is now proliferating outside of the Healthy Neighborhood Study. So for example, one of our partners is a public housing activist who also lives in public housing, and he's engaged in like a regional like public housing consortium. And a lot of the tools and opportunities of engaging in this work in this way with the Healthy Neighborhood Study is now he's transferring over and bringing that over to this other way to show people like we could collect our own data. We can make meaning of it. We can use that information to help us understand how to be more impactful. Like, we have the skill sets to do this. And it's just really amazing to see just not only increasing capacity, but the belief that I can do this, right? I didn't have to go to school and get, all this other stuff, but I have value. I have a lot of things. I know how to gather the evidence to do this type of work and how to build partnerships along the way to do it as well.
Patrice, I think that's really potent because that's speaking to people's sense of agency, which they really need to keep going. And Melissa, something you said resonates with me as well, which is just talking about something spreads it socially. That's how change occurs, right? So that when you talk about something and you get pushback, we tend to think that, oh, we got pushback. They don't agree with me. I'm done. But just talking about it, even if you get pushback, you have changed that person's brain. literally. You have given them new ideas that they may mull about. I see this with one of my siblings who just is stubborn and always argues. And then I hear him saying to somebody else what I told him and we were fighting about, and he was disagreeing with me, and now he's got it, right? So we all have like people in our family like that. But I didn't think I made a dent at all. And yet that's how culture is changed. It's hard work, it's slow, and you don't always see the effect, but you do have these ripple effects, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just by having the conversation. You know, I've been thinking about through the eyes of a planner this afternoon, and thinking about, you know, how our built environments as planners, what we do, the work we do, we're impacting where people live, work, and play, right? And though that is impacting directly on their health outcomes. And I'm wondering how, like, what we can do and think about making positive impacts. And one of that is giving people agency in their built environments, and that they can be part of it. I was really struck by that. And I have to admit, I did not connect necessarily the opioid crisis with our built environments and how that impacts people's mental health and their social networks. And these are things that are rolling around in my brain right now, Tina and Melissa and Patrice. And I wonder if you guys can comment on that about, you know, what planners can do. I mean, trees, something that Lindy talked about, just, you know, how just adding trees to different neighborhoods can impact people's mental health. And why aren't they distributed equitably across our built environments? And what are other things that we can work on to change to improve everybody? Kind of that, you know, analogy of a rising tide lifts all boats. How can we do that? And I know I have a very utopian view of the world, but I like to always try to make things better.
We like to encourage particularly professionals in institutional systems to look inside their scope of control and figure out what they can do that will advance an equity agenda, and then think about what feels outside of their scope of control right now and who their partners would be to impact that. And so it might be that you're somebody who has the ability to launch a program that has more access to tree planting, that resolves the issues that people get concerned about the tree maintenance issues, about the damage to the homes, and helps people figure out a solution that they can imagine working for their lives, right? In a way that's going to push that forward. It might be that you have a set of resources that are available to you, that you can think about the ways in which you contract for your data services, so that you're thinking about programs like Dr. Williams talked about, as much experts as some of the sort of classical planning firms that people hire, and that you're valuing that cost at the same value. It might be that just outside your reach is the ability to talk to the equity officer in a county administrator's office or city manager's office and start to think about the larger parts of funds that are available either through the new federal funding streams or other strategies, and start to think about the project teams that get put together to advance those. A great example we have from Sonoma County here is that there was an equity officer in place, saw the major revenue coming in through the American Recovery Act, knew that was a very flexible source, and started to work with the county administration to set a portion of that money aside for the communities that had been disproportionately hit by COVID-19, right? The design for those funds. That money was then designed, the strategy for how that went out, between public agencies who were required to have a community partner and community partners who were required to have subcontractors who hadn't received public funding before. The idea is that opened up the revenue stream to many more small grassroots community partners who had done massive response during COVID, but who usually hadn't received public funds. Now, several years later, those institutions are partnered with government in different ways, in ways that are sharing more of the needs of very specific communities across that region that had been kind of hidden before, right? Or like not seen is better, probably the word, than hidden. I think those kinds of strategies where you're figuring out what's inside your control, what's slightly outside your control that you can do with partnership that can change the way public systems create access can be really important.
I also want to add, just thinking about Shannon, some of the things that you're saying and building off what Melissa was saying, that I don't think we can address these things in silos. And we just have to really remember that we have to partner to really address these things, because everything has an effect, whether it's good, bad, there's an effect. And we have to take that into consideration, that even something as great as adding more trees can potentially have unintended harms, like creating displacement issues or gentrification, because now this area that's been desperate for greening for a long time has it. Now, as a result, people are increasing the property values are going up. And as a result, also the rent is going up. And now people can't afford to live in these areas and they're getting this public amenity they've been wanting for a long time. And it's just one of those things of like, in working in partnership, this is one of those things of like, okay, this is what we want to do, but how can we prevent this negative consequence, right? How can we get ahead of it? To protect the people here who want to, in a lot of cases, they actually want to live in these communities. Like, this is their social network. This is what they've known for a very long time. Give them the ability to stay if that they want to. So it's just one of those things to sometimes, in our viewpoint, like you were talking about earlier, in our lens, we can also miss other aspects that if we had partnered, we'll be able to bring in, like, okay, we need to think about this, we need to think about that, and just realize we cannot tackle such a massive issue like this in silos. It has to be a cross-sector collaboration. Sorry.
Patrice, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm thinking, as Melissa was talking, physicians like myself don't often intersect with planners. But I'm thinking about data that I read about, as I was working on this book, about the cognitive effects of green space. So there are studies, one can criticize all these studies, but there's a sort of consistent theme among them that exercise, of course, is good for your health, but and it's good for your physical health, but exercising in green space is good not just for your physical health, but for your cognitive health. That child development, kids that are exposed to green space, and it can just be a garden. It can just be like, as opposed to kids that are in high-rise apartment buildings and have no access to green space, their cognitive development is better. You guys know this, you're planners, but this came as a surprise to me. But sometimes I think there are partnerships that clinicians that treat patients can have with planners where, warranted or not, clinicians, physicians, people in the healthcare professions enjoy a high credibility score. And so sometimes having clinicians that will come to hearings or meetings or whatever and can cite some of this research could be beneficial to planners. Or you're trying to push something through a city council or whatever. And sometimes these data can be helpful. So I would just suggest, call on your local clinicians. I mean, you might not want a neurosurgeon, but you might want a pediatrician, or you might want, a public health person who actually studies this stuff. Likewise, some of the data, Patrice, that you're gathering and some of the things about, Melissa, like these can be helpful to us so that we can better advocate with you. And I'm fond of saying we have a lot of axons, not so many dendrites, and climate change we need. That means the lateral connections. Climate change, we need those connections between disciplines. I think that's the only way we're going to start chipping away at some of these really big problems. So I couldn't second with any more enthusiasm what you're saying, Patrice.
Mm-hmm. And the way I've seen that operationalized, so we do a lot of work that's policy work that has sort of white coat advocates talking about the need for these different programs. Is through coalitions. There's often a regional coalition, informal medical coalition, some other partnerships where people who are interested in activating around climate and health, or social equity and health, or racial equity and health, are convened and are willing partners to speak out. So we had that in particular in the work that we did for eviction moratoriums. We passed COVID-19 eviction moratoriums in every county in the Bay Area, and then supported a push to do that across the state of California. And we were able to have medical professionals who really had been paying close attention to what the health risks were related to unstable housing in general, but then what the health risks would be in that moment, come and talk at a number of press and other events, particularly for that reason. And so if folks are looking for people in their local jurisdictions who do that, some of your medical associations, some of your more informal organized medical groups are good places to find them.
Yeah, and there's actually now it's been around for some years now, but Medical Society Consortium for Climate and Health, where national medical organizations from every specialty come together. And that's a wonderful resource to find people. Shannon, I would point out there are some questions in the chat if those are not worth, but if that's something you want to do.
I have been focusing on you guys and not focusing too much on the chat here. Why don't we have a few minutes left. So what I'm going to do is kind of go around and have each of you say what your main takeaway was from the symposium today. I'll go first and then I'll peek over at the chats. But mine is partnerships and looking for those partners. And it brings me back to my childhood in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood and look for the helpers. So planners, look for your helpers in your neighborhood. Why don't you, Tina, why don't you go next? And then I'll check out the chat.
Yeah, I would second that.
I wasn't sure if Melissa wanted to go next or not. But it's partnerships. It's for me also just hearing there was so much work that people are doing in so many different geographies, and there's just so much overlap. I think going back again to what Tina was saying, it's also as people who do this all the time that sometimes it gets so exhausting and you wonder, like, are we ever going to make any, like, even an inch of like change, right? And hearing all the work that people are doing, it's kind of validating that we're all making progress, even if it feels really small. And that, you know, you made a really good point of just interacting with somebody, having a conversation could just start switching things in culture and the brain and other ways. And what I really loved about today is that we came from so many different perspectives, but we're all going towards a common mission. And the different ways that people are tackling this issue are opportunities for us to collaborate, to work together, to continue to address this issue, I thought was a really great takeaway. And I'm just very grateful that you brought so many different people from so many different areas and able to talk about how they're doing this and able to witness that, you know, and be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. And I would say for me, the big takeaway is to be able to hold two opposing ideas at the same time on this issue. One being that there's been progress in the field, and the other that it's not enough, and that there's a way to tell that story to others in a way that can be both inspiring around the progress and a call to action around what's not done, as well as this idea that you know that the small wins can add up. And in fact, maybe they are the only things that ever do, right? If you think about social movement theory, a lot of people will think there was a moment. There was a moment, but there were a whole lot of people working before that moment that helped create it. And so if we can, in those times when it feels like we're not in the moment, remember that it's the groundwork that was laid that got us there, I think it can be a really powerful way to do our work.
Thank you all so much. Thank you everybody who hung in with us for this 4-hour endeavor to try to figure out these complex issues and take a deep dive into how health is impacted by health. And it's been long for health is impacted by equity and by climate change. Donnie, any last words for the group? I was going to put up a slide just outlining the continuing education credits numbers and leave that up on the screen for folks. And I'm sorry that we didn't get to the questions. I know sometimes just asking the question has you starting to think through the answers to that question because you're curious about it. So hopefully some of that gets translated. Donnie?
Yeah, nothing substantial to add, just a big thank you to everybody who participated. And again, a big thank you to the panelists, those that are within my session and those that were participating in the other sessions as well. And good job, Shannon. This fireside chat was really engaging. So thank you for that.
Great.